the Ashland Conservation Commission. First thing I want to do is to just go over the minutes from the last meeting. And
Line 19 and 20, that sentence,
It should be an and design,
look,
that
plan and design,
and instead of. and.
public safety. Safety meeting or safety building?
Yeah, design and safety building. You're right.
Building.
oh, yeah.
Yep.
Good catch.
Missed it.
Design of a public safety building.
Yeah. The plan and design, yeah,
Okay, got it?
Oh, good catch.
yeah.
Now, why is there a highlighted line for 27?
Were you not sure if that was the case?
I was not sure if that was the case.
The limit would be singular regardless.
Gene, I think you mentioned.
Well,
Is that the case?
we talked about the limitations of it being jurisdictional or not, the way they are in the regulations now. It could be a non-jurisdictional feature if it was built during, after what, 1996?
98.
No, I think it's earlier than that.
Okay.
I think it's November of 96, I think, was when the regs were changed. And that we needed to investigate that to see when that basin was constructed.
Well, if you change would to could, would that
Yeah.
address that
Yeah.
issue?
Yeah,
It's a good idea.
yeah.
And limits to limit?
Okay, so 2 changes on line 27.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah, in my comment on the bottom on 41 about no hydric soils observed, I was referring to the stream channel, the little intermittent channel we were looking at.
So just add in the stream channel?
Yeah. Well, actually, on 42, it kind of says it.
Yeah, but, yeah, 39 says it too.
Yeah, never mind.
Never mind. Okay.
On 46, I would just change speaking to speaking about. We weren't really talking to the basin. Line 65, I highlighted this, it says that I think, well, that I think that the replication should be done on another site,
Should it be might be done?
or could be done.
Could be.
Could be.
And then on line 76, I was curious about the phrase, "will need to stay ahead of the meeting dates." What,
Which line?
76?
Basically ensuring that there'd be a quorum once the notice of intent is filed. So keeping ahead to make sure that there'd be a quorum as they're getting ready to submit a notice of intent.
Oh, and this is in relation to Bill having to recuse because of if work is on DCR's property?
Correct.
How about the need to coordinate the meeting dates?
Yep.
Does that work?
Yep,
Yep.
that makes more sense.
Got it.
My next comment on line 96, instead of offloading, it's just pollutant loading, not offloading.
Say it one more time?
Pollutant loading, not offloading. Just take out the off.
What, there's a highlight on 95.
Yeah.
I couldn't make out my handwriting. I wasn't sure if it said tight or right.
Qualified to be a medical doctor.
To line 95.
You thought it might have been right at the stream? Yeah, that probably sounds right. Correct.
Qualified to be a medical doctor.
Oh,
Because the flagging along the stream was right along the stream.
yeah, but it's also tight.
Which is why I couldn't read my handwriting.
I think the intent is that it wasn't coming out into the site at all.
Okay.
Should we say seemed adjacent to the stream?
I don't know, if you don't have a problem with it, we just leave it, that's fine.
Okay.
Line 120, it says you asked about shifts. I don't know what that meant.
I was asking about how often they'd be bringing dogs to the sites and how often they'd be having cars come and go, and what their period was to be on site per day.
Okay, so it's basically a question of how's the site gonna be used.
Right. Logistics.
Why don't we just say that? Asked
About
about how the
shifts.
site will be used.
How the site will be used. Got it.
I mean, I'm just thinking if, 5 years from now, somebody reads this, they're not gonna have any idea what we're talking about.
Mm. What's 146, Gene?
I have no idea.
Well,
Is this about test borings?
yeah. Maybe you should just strike that line.
Yeah.
I'm fine with that.
Mm.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
You did a lot of talking at this meeting.
Apparently I did. Gotta stop that.
Is he-
Making up for lost time.
Mm.
He wants to make sure he wants to make heard.
All right, so Harrington is continued though for tonight, right?
Correct.
So I'm assuming the stuff we asked for, they're still working on it?
Correct.
All right. What's the context of this, saying this area looks like it'll become a sluiceway?
Where I
Yeah,
188 and 189? I don't remember that conversation. Anybody remember what that was about? It doesn't seem to have any context to anything around it.
do you wanna just strike it?
It really doesn't have any bearing on
Yeah, I agree.
the outcome either.
I agree. This, it was highlighted for, because you weren't sure if that's what it was,
Correct,
98.
correct. I wasn't sure if that was, correct the way that I had written it.
It probably is, but it really doesn't have any Wetlands Protection Act bearing,
Okay,
so that's fine that it stays.
On line 197, should we identify who the local historian is?
Was a name said?
a name was said, I can.
Yeah, it was
Dr. Hoffman?
Kurt Hoffman.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can we go back to line 105 to 107, something, maybe not right there. It said that there is no plan, the commission cannot see what the applicant is planning to do, and then it says Mr. Herbert? I don't think that's right.
Yeah, he did ask.
He did?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay, I'm just surprised that it would be in there. Okay. So, what about the said that there is no plan, the commission cannot see? Should that sentence have something added in it? So that the commission cannot,
I would say tell, not see.
so that cannot tell, okay.
Yeah.
So that, right after no plan, so that the commission? Does that make sense? Makes it more of a sentence.
There is no plan, the commission cannot tell what the applicant is planning to do. That sounds okay to me.
Okay.
What is your question, I guess?
It's really kind of a weird sentence, that's all. That's okay. Fine.
Okay.
How about therefore, before the, after the comma? Does that make sense?
Say that one more time, sorry.
On line 105, at the end of the line,
But therefore,
says there is no plan, comma, therefore the commission cannot see what the applicant is planning to do.
Okay, gotcha.
where are we?
You're like at 200.
Yeah.
See anything there?
Man, I didn't realize this was such a long meeting.
It was.
Oh, yeah. We knew.
I want to make sure this is. Okay. comments?
Make a motion to accept the minutes as amended,
Second?
Of December 23rd, 2019.
December 23rd.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Abstain? Abstain.
You don't have to.
I know. I wasn't here and
Doesn't matter on the minutes.
501. Okay, going into the agenda. Carl, did you want to say something?
Well, I would just suggest that we move the informal discussion of the wetland replication area from Mass DOT to the end of the meeting, because there's no one here representing DOT this evening, and there are a lot of people in the audience for other issues, and it would expedite things for the subsequent hearings.
I second that.
Okay, do you want to handle that, or you want me? I have to abstain.
Oh, all right. So we'll move it to, so we have a motion?
Yeah.
Okay,
You made a motion.
motion, second. All in favor?
Aye.
I abstain. Now, what I'd also like to do is review the ORAD before we get into the hearings. There's a couple people here for that I'd rather not make them sit through everything, if we can avoid that. In your package, Megan put some information together on all the previous filings at Union Street, 16 Union Street. This is, as we all know, this property's had quite a history to it. Now, we don't have, is there a draft ORAD in here?
No, there's not. We needed to review the flags, so there's no draft.
Okay. All right, but you colored them up here.
Correct.
Okay. So basically, what we would be approving essentially would be the pink flags?
The green and the green is what I proposed the commission to approve, because that's within the proposed parcel.
Yep.
The orange flags is what the wetland scientist through the town has requested that we accept, because they do impact the planning and the design of the project. The pink is what we observed on site. And
Okay.
most of those flags you're gonna see are pretty consistent with what we observed on site.
Okay.
Where's the basin?
The basin is,
Is that 102 and 100? Is that what it is?
yes.
Yes, it is.
That's the outer edge of the basin into the woods, and then the other side of that line is the sharp edge that we walked along. And water was spilling over. That's the berm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm fine with the flag positioning. We didn't change anything, right, in the field? Did we, in your research here that you gave us a summary of, the interim drainage plan, the basin is shown upgrading of Series A. So is that the basin we're talking about?
I'm gonna pull the plan so you can see. This file was pretty empty.
Where is
It
it?
only contained this one plan. So
All right, let me take a look at that.
it shows a basin to be constructed just north of the A flag series that we see in our plans tonight.
While you're looking at that, Gene, can I ask Lauren a question? Lauren, could you go to the podium? And just for those of you who are watching and wondering what the heck we're talking about, it's 12 Union Street, which is the old Clocktown package store property. We're delineating the wetlands. And I may have asked you this before, and I apologize if I did because I can't remember the answer. But we have, our official business here this evening is to approve the wetland delineation of just the proposed gift parcel, correct?
Correct.
But there are other portions off of that parcel that are delineated,
Yes.
and then some that are not delineated.
Yes.
What was the reason for that?
The reasoning was to delineate anything that could potentially have a buffer zone affecting the gifted parcel. So we did have permission to go and delineate, areas off the gifted parcel that could potentially have a 100-foot buffer zone encroaching onto it, since they're in the back there is pretty extensive wetlands. So, just to kind of know where those limits are. And clearly, some of them do have buffers that encroach onto the gifted parcel, and some are a little further away.
So the flags in the back of the entire parcel are your flags or previous flags?
They're both. I piggybacked on those flags for the most part. We agreed with each other, but they extend kind of to the, I guess, south of that boundary. But then we didn't flag everything else kind of further to the west.
To the west, right?
Where there would be no additional lines that would affect the
Are
gifted parcel.
those wetlands flagged by anyone?
I believe you would flag, Rich, Kirby? Which ones? The ones on
The
this side.
furthest west on,
Further west of the gifted.
There are some wetland flags over
There
there.
were
yes.
some, but we just didn't continue the line because it wouldn't affect, it would have no potential to have a buffer on the gifted parcel.
got you, okay, thank you.
Okay, based on this plan, which is identified as a proposed interim drainage plan, which was from July of 1998, apparently. So that's, at least gives us a time when this thing was constructed. I'm not sure how to treat it entirely. I mean, it's a drainage plan that shows a basin along with a couple of drainage swales and things that were constructed on the site at the same, assumingly going to be constructed around the same time. It's not exactly a stormwater basin per se for water treatment and,
Water retention.
water, yeah. It's not clear what the purpose of it is. Apparently our files are kind of thin on that, because basically the plan itself is the only thing that was in the file. I mean, there's no drainage calcs, all the kinds of things that we would typically be required to have to classify something as a stormwater basin.
Could it have been meant to be a temporary
Well-
basin to address a runoff issue?
Well, the plan itself was proposed interim,
Oh, okay.
so I think, yes, it was probably intended to be temporary. Which has survived for quite a while now. Well, and one thing, clearly, it's not been maintained along the way, as was typical for a stormwater system. I don't know, what do you all think? I mean, the question is whether or not to classify that wedge of what is on the plan as jurisdictional wetland or not. There's jurisdictional wetland below it, and there's jurisdictional wetland above it. It's kind of surrounded, whether it's jurisdictional or not, it doesn't strike me as though it's got a whole lot of development utility, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it doesn't look like it. Yeah, it doesn't.
But nonetheless, I mean, we've been asked to make a determination on that. That, to me, I think everything else is pretty straightforward and simple here. The lines, I think, are accurate and appropriate. We looked at them in the field. We all, we agreed with it. The only thing is what is the status of this one bit of the site that's it's on the west side of the parcel?
Well, we don't know what the status was intended 20 years ago, other than it was interim, and 20 years hardly qualifies as interim. So I would think that we would have to determine what it is currently.
Right.
It's, personally, when we were standing there, we were all knee-deep in water.
Right.
Regardless of whether we were in a wetland or the basin. So it's like that whole site, it has kind of evolved over time.
Right. Well, and along that same line, this interim drainage plan shows two stone-lined swales coming down the hill, both of which are now well within the flagged boundary that we would be approving.
Within the A-series boundary?
No, it's the B series.
Okay.
There's that pipe that comes out from up at the
From the D series.
southeast side.
Okay.
Then there was a stone-lined swale connecting down to the basin.
Mm-hmm.
But according to this, it was not a very wide channel. It's this thing. And then on the other side, near the edge of the the gift parcel, there's another stone-lined swale that comes down, again, drops into that basin, both of which are actually, according to this plan, don't appear to have been in a wetland, but now they're clearly well within a wetland. I don't know. So what is your suggestion? What's your
Well, I
recommendation?
don't really have a suggestion other. Lauren, you, when you flagged this, you flagged that as not a wetland?
When I flagged it originally,
Hmm?
I didn't have quite the detail on the background of the site, so I flagged the whole outer boundary of the whole system. I didn't identify this area is a stormwater basin and this is not. But there is a clear definition between where there is a basin-like depression within the wetland and where it becomes a vegetated wetland. So, after reading about the interim drainage plan and seeing it and seeing where it fell within the wetland, it was pretty clear to me that that was a constructed feature, and you can tell exactly where that is.
When this property is developed, they're gonna have to redo that drainage system, I'm assuming.
They're going to have to do
So that
extensive-
would kind of make this basin a moot point at that point, wouldn't it?
Well, there are two things. One, is it jurisdictional? And two, could it be used for a basin in the future? Because if we classify this as jurisdictional wetland, it's not allowed to use a jurisdictional wetland for stormwater management, or at least to place fill for the purposes of stormwater management.
Right.
Okay? So if we determine that this is a basin, in the future, whether it's the town or the landowner, they could convert this basin back into a basin, I guess.
Mhm.
Or modify it in a way that it functions as a basin. If we determine that it's part of the wetland now and not to be considered a stormwater basin, then theoretically couldn't do that.
Is it really functioning as a basin?
Well, according to this plan, there is an inlet location. It's a perforated PVC outlet riser in washed stone, where we saw one. So there is an outlet structure for it.
That is basin
I mean, the thing was almost underwater, but it was
Yeah.
that PVC pipe that we saw in the middle of the pond. And that's connected to an 8-inch pipe that drains down below, to the wetland below that, which I think we saw
Yeah.
where that outlet point was.
Now, it says interim, but what would have possible use after the interim period is over, which we don't know what it is anyway, so
Speak into the mic, KG.
what could have been there?
Say again?
So what I meant was that plan says interim, right now that was designed as a basin for them. But if they had kept that interim portion as whatever the short period was, and what would they would have done it, or what could have been the possible use for it at that time, or beyond that use?
Well, I assume they put this in, I mean, I'm just conjecturing here, because I don't know what they wanted to do, but there were plans to redevelop the site. And that I believe there were drainage issues at the time. And they put this in as a stopgap to sort of collect the water and
Did not-
control the flow, so there wasn't as much erosion and so forth off the
Yeah,
site.
there was no intent to create a wetland there.
No, I'm sure there wasn't,
Right.
yeah. But the fact is that it's developed, it's been 20 years.
Mhm.
Actually, it's
Going on
yeah, it's
22.
about 20, yeah, a little over 20. The site has obviously grown up with vegetation, a lot more than probably was there when that was built. Definitely more than, because, I mean, that berm is well vegetated now. Yeah, I'm not completely sure how we should act on this, for this aspect of it, whether we consider this a basin or not.
If we consider it a basin, would that cause any harm to any of the wetlands around it, really? If they end up using it as that? Shouldn't really, right?
Probably not. I mean, I don't know what modifications they would want to make to it, so that, you know, there's probably some regrading of it or something that's required, or would be required. I mean, they'd have to, right now, the site's undeveloped. If you came in with a building plan with buildings, pavement and so forth, you're gonna need someplace to control that water, receive that water. This is probably not big enough for that. So they'd probably have to expand it, probably have to change the outlet structure.
So it would do damage.
Oh, yeah, well,
to wetlands, right?
I mean, most of this feature extends out of the gift parcel that we didn't look at. So I don't know what over there would be jurisdictional wetland that would have to get modified.
Well, do you
If
have
any.
any experience with temporary basins that have an expiration time for them?
No, there isn't any jurisdictionally to my knowledge. This comes up from time to time with sand and gravel pits, where sand and gravel is excavated out till they hit the groundwater, and they basically walk away from it, and somebody comes in, wants to develop it, and wetlands are developed in those areas where they've encountered groundwater. They're clearly man-made features as a result of construction that, I've talked with DEP about this, and they don't have any
Guidance.
guidance on that, or you know, if it's been more than 5 years since there was construction, it's not jurisdictional, or it is jurisdictional. I've talked with them and I've talked with the Corps of Engineers about it, and there's no, everybody's silent on that.
Well, if there's no precedent for this, because what you described is exactly what happened here, other than it wasn't a sand and gravel pit, but it was excavated and left, and it probably was not a wetland before the groundwater was intercepted there when that was done. And it has now become a wetland area. If this helps to shed any light on anything, I thought that we had tentatively agreed that that would
No, I know
be
that.
non-jurisdictional. Does anyone, does that,
We had talked about that.
That was the intent of connecting those flags.
that's what I
was
thought.
To
Yeah.
identify,
The
at least
basin.
identify the basin.
Right.
And in the last meeting, we talked about that could be a point of, if it were non-jurisdictional, it could be a potential point of replication if they had to fill, on the gifted area and needed an area to replicate on-site. Does that ring a bell too?
This dilemma comes because there is some history in that. Otherwise, it would have been declared as wetland.
Well, if we call this a basin, then it could be a mitigation area. They could restore it
That's
and
what-
recover it. That's
If
right.
So if you make it non-jurisdictional,
But if it's jurisdictional, you couldn't do that.
right.
Does that sound familiar to you,
Yeah,
what
we
we
had
had
that discussion.
discussed?
We
I
had-
think if we discussed that, and that's the way we were leaning, that's the way that we should go.
Okay.
I think that makes sense, yeah.
It doesn't make sense from a common sense perspective, because if it were flagged today, it would probably be considered a wetland.
Well, she said she had done it originally like that, and then because of the basin, she had changed the lines, right?
Yeah.
So I thought you were
Well,
saying,
that, I think, you didn't know it was a basin, I think, as a result of your response.
originally.
Yeah, during the
Yeah.
original delineation, it was before I had reviewed any files,
Yeah.
about previous development. So,
Which was a big part of why we went to look at the site. was to
Exactly.
Figure out what
Yeah.
was the boundary of this feature.
right.
Okay, so do you want to make a motion?
I can if you want. I think we should call this area non-jurisdictional.
So that would be this sort of
The
wedge-shaped
basin.
area?
Yep, correct.
And
On the plan that we have in front of us
So
for
that would be
12 to
bounded
16.
by, let me read this.
WF S100, S102, S104, B4, and B3, B2, right?
So the S series, that was a separate feature. That was actually a drainage channel that
Oh, okay.
was flowing down the slope into the A series wetland, which didn't have a,
So the boundaries of the basin are what?
the
then?
boundaries of the basin would be B1, which is just over the line
Yeah.
of the gifted parcel,
Yep.
Okay,
to B7, and
Oh,
that's
okay.
the line following the berm.
okay.
And then from B7, we created a new series, B100, would connect to B7.
Oh, okay, so that wedge there.
Yes.
Okay,
And then B100 to B102.
Okay.
did
so
you
that's a
want-
big wedge.
Oh, okay.
And then there's a 30, what is that?
Oh, yeah, it's called out in the plan as non-jurisdictional stormwater basins.
Yeah, I see it now, yeah. Yep.
And then we would connect B102 to a previously existing flag,
36, 38?
38, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody seconding?
I'll second.
Hello?
So that's the basin area. And other than that, we're gonna accept all the rest of those lines as bordering vegetated wetland?
Within the said parcel or outside too?
Well, we'll list the numbers, the actual sequence, which represent the.
Gifted
Is it
parcel.
the orange? We can go to the pink ones, actually.
Yeah.
Because we did look at all those.
And again, the pink lines on these plans are the ones that the commission observed on site during that site walk. The green is kind of what I was proposing based on what's on the proposed parcel. The orange highlighted flags is what Lauren was requesting, which is also pretty consistent with what I was proposing, but also goes just over the gifted parcel line because it does impact their plan and design purposes for the public safety building. But they're all fairly consistent.
Okay, you've got this colored plan?
I do.
You see what we're
Yep,
talking about?
right, yep.
So I would say we start at the pink series down near Union Street, come up that, where then it becomes orange as well. And then,
The greens.
well, I mean, that's a good question. The tail that extends up, is that the S series there?
Yes.
That's a channel?
That was, we were calling a non-jurisdictional drainage channel.
Oh, okay.
That's actually, I don't think that's where the discharge is from that basin.
No,
No, it's further on down.
it
It's
seems
further
more
over
like
to the west,
an
isn't it?
eroded.
Hmm.
Yeah.
This is what was coming through those big pipes, right?
No, so the pipes were kind of just sitting on the ground surface as a remnant of some
But
past.
this was, the flow was coming around the,
The flow was coming near those pipes, so it was overtopping from the B, and as you
Right.
recall, it was an extremely, like, we have never seen water out there like this, it was overflowing. But under normal conditions, the B series is contained by that berm,
yeah.
and then there is a little eroded channel that runs down into the A series, which did not have an observed pipe or other hydrologic wetland connection, and that's the S series. So that's why I called it non-jurisdictional, was because it didn't possess wetland characteristics, and it was more of a kind of an upgradient swale that during those rain events probably does collect that overtop from the B series. But up until that site visit, I had never seen water in it.
Okay, so you're suggesting then that we eliminate, we do not include the S series flagging as jurisdictional,
Yes.
because it's a stream up gradient.
Yeah, and I had flagged it to kind of show that, you know, we did observe it, it was there, but that we would classify it that way.
Okay. Understand that?
Yeah, I guess I have a little problem with the fact that there was a lot of water there. It was raining.
Yeah.
It wasn't a 100-year storm, and there was an inch of snow on the ground that melted in the rain. So in the middle of a drought, obviously, there's not going to be water there. But that wasn't exactly an extreme wet condition. It was a wet condition. And it showed what can show up on the site in a wet condition. It wasn't close to a 100-year storm. It wasn't even close to an extreme storm. It was a lousy day to be doing a site walk, but that's about what it amounted to. So I wouldn't make light of the fact that there's a lot of water here. And I guess that's my question is, we are just approving the delineation for the gift parcel, but we have wetland flags on the non-gift parcel. And so if we approve this ORAD, are those flags enforceable against the property owner? And
Not unless not unless they're written into the ORAD.
sir, do you expect them to be? Do you expect them to be accepted?
And come to the podium so folks can hear you.
I think you're talking about.
Right, so are we still talking about,
Well, we're talking about everything outside of the
The
proposed
other-
parcel.
The other flags on the,
well, because
Figure.
is it the S series?
well,
The
no, I
S series
think-
flags are
Carl,
within the gifted parcel.
correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about everything.
Everything outside of the yellow line.
He's talking about all the flags that are on the.
Oh, I mean, I think our expectation is that the ORAD is for the gifted parcel, and that the flags approved would be those located on, or I suppose immediately adjacent to, the gifted parcel to the extent they place buffer. So I think we'd be okay with the Pink Series flags, if you will, because those do extend just off-site a little
They're
bit.
the only ones that do extend, well, there's a little on the Orange Series, too.
Yeah.
So any future submission for the rest of the parcel would have to either go through an ORAD process or review the NOI, or
Review the
as part of the NOI,
delineation
review
as
the
part of the
flagging on the
NOI,
rest of the
yes.
site. So we're not, by not acknowledging those wetland flags, doesn't mean they're not there, and we won't be looking at them at some point in the future if there is a development plan.
So we're going to identify the individual flags here in the.
All we're gonna ID now are the flags that we're approving as part of this ORAD.
Well, I think we were pretty clear that we were okay with the flagging when
Yeah.
we were there.
Before we go, let him identify who he is for the record.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, sorry, Rich Kirby, LEC Environmental, on behalf of Fafford Real Estate.
And Lauren, do you want to identify yourself too? I don't believe that you did.
I'm Lauren Gluck with Park Corporation, and I'm here as a consultant for the town.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so the question, you brought up the S-Series flags. Are you suggesting that they be included as jurisdictional?
Well, what do the rest think?
Well, it's not BBW, it's Stream Channel.
So it would be better to have a bank flag rather than a BBW flag?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's why I'm saying that we would call that out as a Stream Channel rather than as BBW. Everything else, all the other flags on site are bounding BBW. That would be, in essence, an intermittent stream, but you're suggesting that it's upgradient of a resource and therefore not jurisdictional.
Yeah, just based on the definition of intermittent stream, being that the
Right.
section upgradient of other wetlands is
Right.
non-jurisdictional.
So you understand that?
Mhm.
everybody? I mean, it is accepting water that's overflow being discharged, or at least when we were there, discharged from the basin.
Mhm.
Because the basin was overtopping the berm, because the outfall structure, the outlet structure was either not functioning or was overwhelmed by the amount of water that was coming through there. All right, what's the pleasure of the commission? Do you want to include that or not?
You mean you want to amend the motion? That's what you're talking? Which you made.
Well, in the motion, I want to stipulate what we're approving,
Yeah, this is separate from the other.
which is, as I started carrying up the A series, the B series, with the exception, is that all B up there? That's all B. So the B series including B 100, 102, and a number 38, and then the rest of the B series with the exception of B1 through B7. Because that would be the side of the berm.
So the motion is amended to include the stated flags.
Okay, yeah. And
I need
and
somebody
then it would
second it.
include
The D series.
the
No,
B
he's still doing
series
it.
on the gift parcel, and then the D series, guess. where should-
D1 through D.
No,
eight?
I think it'd be D2 through D6.
yeah,
There's a mistake on the
Well,
plans too,
Yeah.
because it goes from
That was a surveyor-
WFD1, WFD3, WFD2.
Yeah, they flip-flopped the numbers. We can certainly
that happens.
adjust.
So I would take it to D10, because after that, it pulls away and the buffer zone wouldn't affect the gift parcel.
Okay,
And we looked at that, right?
we did look at it.
Yes.
So I would say D1 to D10. And again, that's representing BBW. We get back to the S series. What's the commission's pleasure on that? Do we want to include that or not?
Well, we didn't really walk that.
Yeah, we did.
site.
Yes, we did.
Did we get all the way
Yeah,
up
it was
there?
draining
Okay.
very well. I mean, it's a connection.
all the way up to like F2?
No, that's flowing out of the berm
It was spilling
down
over the
into
berm.
the,
Okay.
I mean, there could be other
the A
areas.
series below.
There could be other areas too which we did not see, other than these.
No,
So,
we saw everything.
Yeah,
I would suggest that
Within the
we.
gift parcel, we
within
saw.
the, outside the gift parcel is
Oh,
meant.
we're not we're not,
Okay.
we're not
I would
suggest
approving
what?
anything
I
outside.
would suggest that we make it jurisdictional,
The stream?
that part, yes,
As an
I would say so.
As an intermittent stream, because it occasionally receives overflow
Mhm.
from the basin. Okay, well,
But the
don't-
basin is also getting it from the wetlands that are around there too,
yeah,
so.
so,
It's,
yeah, I don't know that it would have a ton of implications on the development if they did need to build over there. It's not BBW, it's a drainage, it's a intermittent stream channel. They would have
Yeah,
to
it's
address.
right on, it's basically on the edge of the
Yeah.
parcel, so.
Okay, so
Really-
I don't think it's worth arguing over too much, as long as they're not trying to call it a BBW,
Okay,
which it's not.
okay, so that would include,
S1 to S4 and S100 to S104.
okay.
Say it one more time.
S1 to S4 and S100 to S104.
I think we should also acknowledge that the C-Series flagging is isolated and not jurisdictional.
Oh, yeah.
Isolated, meaning that it doesn't border on a body of water.
Or a stream. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You wanna,
Well,
as amended?
as amended, with the seconding the amendment, seconding the
All in favor?
amendment.
Yeah.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstained?
abstain,
Why?
because I wasn't here.
Oh, okay. All righty,
All right,
finally.
thank you.
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry that took so long. We can walk through it, we'll walk through it again. I can't read the numbers.
Can I call you tomorrow?
Oh, we can do it later.
Thank
Thanks, guys. Okay, the next item is a notice of intent filed by Marissa Hannon for 40 Pond Street for a proposed fence, vegetation management, and private dog park. My understanding that this has been requested for continuation by the applicant
Yes, to the 27th.
to the 27th.
So moved.
Second.
Do I, okay, I have a motion already. All in favor?
Aye.
Quick.
Okay. Okay, the next item is a notice intent and stormwater management permit for George Harrington for Lot 4 Harrington Drive for a single-family home. It's been requested to continue until January 27th.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
Oh,
You're obstinate.
wasn't here.
He's obstinate.
Okay. Okay, the next item on the agenda is 95-926, a notice of intent and stormwater management permit for Eversource for the Hopkinton to Ashland transfer line, gas line replacement from Hardwick Road to Cedar Street, continued from 12/9, excuse me. And for this project, I am recusing myself.
I am also recusing myself,
Thank you so much.
future chair.
Cut that out. Okay. I'm opening the meeting for 95-926 NOI SMP Eversource Hopkinton to Ashland transfer line, gas line replacement from Hardwick Road to Cedar Street. Guys, anything on
Well,
questions?
no, I
comments?
think there must be somebody here to at least present. And
From
I don't,
Eversource.
I don't believe we have to go back and recreate the wheel here on this
No.
one. But maybe we can
Please, no.
just summarize where we ended off last time and go from there.
And just so the commission's aware, the reason why Matt Verrill is not here, who has been our peer review consultant for this project, is because his contract has been fulfilled at this point. meaning we had 2 different contract amendments with him, and he's fulfilled all of those requirements at this point, and the budget has now been expended. So Mr. Verrill's not here tonight, not because of a conflict, but because the budget has been expended and he's fulfilled the requirements of our contracts.
Name, don't forget, name and let people know, please.
Good evening, my name's Rick Paquette. I'm with SWCA Environmental Consultants. I'm here tonight on behalf of Eversource Energy. I'm also joined by Matt Waldrop, Environmental Manager for the project, and Ken Stanley, also an engineer from Trimont Engineering, representing the design work for the project. Since our last meeting on the 9th, as you recall, we had submitted a package of supplemental responses to the last round of comments that we received. The commission hadn't had a chance to review that at that last meeting, or at least had the chance to review it, for our December 9th meeting. But subsequent to that point, and stepping forward here, we submitted a comment response letter in response to the town engineer's questions about providing some additional details on potential loss of flood storage from installation of the pipe within the floodplain. So we responded in a letter actually this morning, and received an acknowledgement email back from the town engineer on that as well, that appears to have satisfied his questions regarding that particular issue. The only other thing I'll mention as far as additional information from our last hearing, and I'll throw this out to the commission, is there were a number of questions related to stream crossings and flume pipes and dam and pump. I had brought photographs of wetland construction showing matting and things like that. I didn't have any photos at the time with me for that activity for the stream crossings. I do have some tonight. It's up to you if you want. I can show you those on the wall in the presentation. Just give you an example of what a typical installation across a stream would look like, if that's something you're interested in. I'll just throw that out to you.
Yeah, I'd be interested.
That's only installation, not installing in a place already there's a pipe, and that place is not.
These photos there are other pipeline projects, and in one case it's installation of a linear anode within a pipeline right away, but it just shows you how the BMPs are set up. If you're doing a dam and pump, it shows examples of what a dam could look like. They're just other projects that I'm aware of that I have information on. So just if you're interested in seeing what that would look like. So
While you're setting that up, Madam Chair, I have one quick question. If you can be sitting up, is it Mr. Stanley? Yes, sir. And were you here at the last? I was. You were. Yes, okay. Then could you come up to the microphone? You were the person apparently that answered this question, and I apologize for not recognizing you, but I think I asked at that time what the timeline would be for that operation of running the pipeline underneath Cold Spring Brook. Do you remember that question?
We did talk about it briefly. I believe, if the question is how long would it take, I believe my answer may have been, obviously depending upon the amount of water at the time of the crossing would dictate either the length of time it would take or the method used to cross that particular area.
I thought, and I know that this is kind of non-specific because, starting when and ending when, I guess, but I thought that you, and correct me if I'm wrong, said that it would take a month. Does that sound correct?
It could potentially take a month. I don't see that.
So this area would be either operating on a pump or a flume for that amount of time?
Potentially, yes. And again, it would, depending upon the condition of the crossing at the time in which we do that. So I felt that it was an adequate amount of time given a typical situation, I guess, would be my best response to that. But again, it's depends on what happens at the time in which it's being built, would determine the length of time it would take to do it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think KG has
I
some
got
questions.
a bunch
he
of
said.
questions.
Two.
I don't know who's going to
Okay, it's
respond from their group, but I'll just ask. When you install the new pipe, how far away from the old existing pipe that you're going to install? I'm assuming the existing pipe is at the center of the pathway that's being prescribed. Is that,
Yes, so the
Say-
existing line that's there, it varies throughout the right-of-way, throughout the alignment. So it's not a standard offset. So wherever the pipeline is existing, we would be as far away from that as we could be safely to install the new line within the right-of-way given.
how do you make it a definite number, or you just guess it out and then,
Well, we have to discover where the line, we would uncover it,
Why-
locate where that existing line is.
why would the original pipe be not in a straight line within the center point of the pathway?
It would be based on the time of construction when it was originally installed.
Right, but
So whatever-
why would they not put it at the center of the
easement.
easement rather than at one end or the other end, or turn it around inside the easement?
They
Is
would
that
have
because of
installed
ledge possibilities and other
whatever
things?
obstruction might be there.
Okay, so if there is an obstruction like that in this current situation, you have to break the ledge. How are you going to break the ledge in a safe distance from the another pipe which is active with the natural gas? How would you keep that safe enough for the public as well as for the
Right.
local habitats?
Yeah, our standard method would be is to use some type of excavated material and/or handheld instruments in order to move rock or ledge. I'm not, ledge found right next to the line would have to be determined based on, again, the depth and width and condition of what we find.
So you don't have a information about it as of today, what's there underneath?
Not for
On
all
your
the length of-
records.
Not for all the length of the line, no.
Can we let them finish presenting?
Oh, sure, definitely.
Okay, go ahead and finish,
Finish, I'll come back to my other
do
question.
your presentation, and then we'll come back to the
Just
questions.
give me 1 second,
Yep.
hopefully this will go all right. What's it? Oh.
And while he's loading that, I just wanted to make a quick announcement. I have a comment review sheet that I give to the commission for any sort of hearings that are coming in front of the commission, where I go back and forth between the applicant or their representative to understand and to give comments so they can make plan revisions or revise documents as needed before they go to the commission. It's not in front of the commission tonight because with this project being as big as it is, that comment sheet is now at about 64 pages. So in order to allow the folks that are here present at this meeting tonight in the audience, and as well as the commission members and Eversource's representatives, I've put it on the actual computer, and I'm going to be asking Eversource to pull up that PDF when they're done with their presentation to go back to certain comments that I had.
You're not going through 64 pages.
No.
No, there were still some open ones, though,
About
definitely.
a dozen of them.
Yeah,
were
there were
open.
still some open ones that hadn't been finalized.
Okay, so just real briefly, there's not a ton of stuff here. I just basically going to provide some photos and to give you an example of these different stream crossing techniques. So the first series of photos I'm going to show you is what a dam and pump would look like. It's a dry crossing. And again, just as a refresher, the whole point of these BMPs is to isolate the trench from this flowing stream. And in this case, you'd basically create dams and pump the water around to a downstream dam as opposed to having the water running through your work zone, which would obviously introduce sediment into the water and create turbidity plumes. So this first photo is showing a pipeline right away. with the pipe markers. This is not a pipeline installation, it's installation of a linear anode, which is it's a cathodic protection. They install them in pipeline right-of-ways, but it's a cable, which is not unlike what we're talking about here. It's a pretty heavy-duty cable that they'll install next to pipes. So this shows a pipeline easement. You're looking down the easement. You got a stream crossing here, installation of the silt fence to isolate the stream and protect the stream from work going up gradient of that. So that's kind of an initial setup there. So this shows the area after a dam has been placed. So you're isolating the stream flow within that section of the stream where the trenching is going to take place, and then the equipment's moving down and across the stream. So this again shows you the downstream dam. You've got pumps going around. There's a discharge here. You can see where there's they set up a little. And this, the method, the BMPs, it varies quite a bit, but the whole gist of discharging water back into the stream on the downstream side is to keep it from scouring out the stream channel itself, the bottom of the stream. So that's what this is here. So you've got a trench that's being dug, the stream that's been basically dried out, and then the downstream dam there.
What, I'm sorry, what's the water that's in the trench? Where's
That's water that collects in there from the actual, the channel. It's not dry in the sense, unless you have a super dry year, there'll most likely be water below grade in the channel. That's just a function of groundwater, basically.
That looks like a lot more than 30 feet.
Well, again, these are not,
FYI.
this is not, I'm trying to give you a representative
Okay.
of how the BMPs are installed and what they would look
Okay.
like. None of these photos are for a 30-foot easement. This is probably,
Okay.
I'm gonna say this one's about 50 feet.
At least, yeah.
That's just a picture showing the equipment, some of the equipment, the pumps and hoses that would be used for the installation. Again, I mentioned, so that this is a downstream side of the stream, so the water is being pumped around down through the hose, and then it's discharged through a structure there to break up the flow and keep it from scouring out the stream bottom. And this is following the construction. They went ahead and restored the banks of the stream, and they're working on restoring the workspace up gradient of there. And using blankets to stabilize slopes along with mulch. And then you can see here's a kind of a fiber log as well to work to keep any sediment from moving down the slope into the stream channel. This photo is a little out of sequence, but this is the upstream side of the dam here, and there's the hose and the pump there. So that was a dam and pump operation. These photos are from a larger installation. The pipe diameter for this one is, I believe it's about 30 inches in diameter. But again, this is a flume crossing just to show you what it would look like, or could look like in terms of how it's done. So the first thing they would do is construct an equipment crossing using mats over the stream, so they have a work area. The right-of-way runs this kind of, I'm going to say north to south along here, and the stream is down in here. You can see some silt fence along the edge of the wetland boundary and on the other side, so you've got a wetland here. This is a picture showing the stream before the fluming operation takes place. Again, you've got the right-of-way on this side, and then you've got your silt fence and hay bales. So as they move down the right-of-way, they grade and clear. And again, this operation is much larger than what we're talking about here. So on this crossing, you can see you've got the flume pipes going across these two large pipes here to carry the flow to the other side of the right-of-way. There's some more close-ups. This is a close-up, again, the same situation. Here's the trench where the pipe's gonna go. Your flume pipes are above it. The excavator works beneath it to dig the trench out below it. and the water is being run through those pipes to the downstream side of your dam. It's just another view of that, of the piping moving the water. And from the other side, again. This is a close-up view of the discharge side of a flume operation. So you've got the water flowing out of the pipe here, and the sandbag dams that are constructed on both sides of the workspace. And this is following the installation of the pipe in this particular project, and then the restoration of the bank and the riparian area upslope from there. Just another view here. You get the equipment bridge. So this is how you bridge you bridge the crossing, so you have an ability to move across it, and then you set up your flume. In this case, the contractor used steel sheets instead of a sandbag dam to create the dam. So the materials do vary, and then you get your pumps located here. This is a much larger operation, but this gives you an idea. And then this is post-construction of that area. Along this pipe installation was occurring along a power line easement. And I've just got a few other photos that show another dam and pump operation. Again, this is a right-of-way. You can see the erosion controls, the equipment crossing, and then there's a stream down in there. And it's the same type of operation. You can see the spanning of it across the trench. And then that's the follow-up after the construction is complete. And that's about, I think that's 1 year out. That's it for the photos there.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any questions or comments from the commission on the photos?
Yeah, so the restored area, that's upland, right? That's an upland seed mix that you would put down. That wouldn't be wetlands, that last slide that you showed us.
Yeah, we would, for any wetland areas, we would apply a wet mix so that there's the right plant assemblage that would go in there. And then for upland areas, we would use I think it's termed a conservation mix, that would be used as well. And there are a couple different varieties that, some if you're in a shadier versus an open sun situation. So, but yeah, the seed mixes will vary depending on where you're at.
And the seed mixes will include a nurse seed based off of the comments from Matt Verrill?
That's correct, yep. Through the Matt Verrill's input, you wanted to see an annual rye is kind of the go-to seed mix to get a quick stabilization of soils, and that's what would be used here.
And then one season that nurse seed dies off?
Right, that's
Okay.
exactly right. Because
Okay.
the whole point is it actually works out pretty well, because it gets you that initial lockdown of the soils, but it's an annual. So the other species that are in your wet mix are taking a little bit longer to get going, and by that time, they're up. The other annuals have died back, and you're on your way to a restoration situation.
Thank you.
Sure.
If I may continue my questions.
I don't know, did we wanna go over that other set of sheets, or go ahead with this?
KJ can go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The pipes were laid out currently 75 years ago or 80 years ago, something like that?
I think it was in the 1950s.
50s?
Yep.
So the joints that connect the pipes, how strong are they? Do they hold for any local vibrations or ledge breaking? Will they strongly be held back, or will there be an issue with unknown disasters?
I'm not a pipeline engineer, so I can't speak to that, but I use, you want to,
Yeah.
Ken's an engineer, so.
So the pipelines that's been installed have been, there's a protection associated with installing those lines, so there's cathodic protection that ensures the protection of wall loss, we'll say, of the pipeline itself. Lines have lasted many years, as long as they have, in this case, under safe operations.
Right, but I don't expect you to be going with heavy equipment every day on top of those existing pipes, have you?
Right. We can, the
Have they
pipelines
done?
The pipelines can take some pressure on top of the line, and we do intend to have our matting in some areas would work on top of that line. That's a common practice in the industry.
Right.
So we do expect to use equipment over those mats that would be over the pipeline itself that currently exist, and which we feel is safe operation to do that.
Right, but when you try to break the ledge or cut the ledges out, then there could be additional.
There can be vibration, and
And that could, even though if there's no pressure, the vibrations can shake the things and make.
yes. And there's
joints.
we'll be monitoring pressure at the same time and monitoring the existing line as that operation is happening.
Do you have a plan for any unknown disasters? Have you made any plans in that?
Well, there's I'm not sure if there's an existing plan.
These questions may seem like
No,
unrelated to
that's-
wetland, but they
understood.
are ultimately because
Understood.
I don't want to have a disaster here and then break up the entire ecology system there.
Sure, no, thank you, KG. For the record, I'm Matt Waldrop, Environmental Specialist with Eversource. To answer your first question about the vibrations, if there was ledge that needed to come out, which there very well could be, we would either, if it was a piece that was isolated, we would probably just remove it if it was a large stone with an excavator using conventional construction methods. If it was a larger piece, what we would likely do would be to saw cut, use similar methods that we use in the street by other utilities, so there's no reason to believe that, there would be some type of issue on an easement versus in the street, using the same methods, saw cutting or just removing with some type of excavator. In terms of emergency response plans, we have, the company, although highly unlikely, is well prepared for any type of issue that came up in that regard. We have an emergency response group that monitors situations like that. And proud to say we're very proud of our safety record and proud of the status of our facilities across really New England. That's part of the reason why when there was the Merrimack Valley incident that happened, that Governor Baker put us in charge of cleaning that up. So, we're very proud of that record, and we have significant processes in place should something like that happen, even though I can't stress how highly unlikely it would be for doing a project like this.
So has there been any disasters that you have handled in wetland areas and then there's remote corners where there is no room for emergency vehicles to get in there either, because you have to use the public road and then get into the nooks and corners of the wetland?
Yeah, so I'd respectfully object to the term disaster. I don't think we've been involved in any, type of disasters, period.
No, what I meant is
but-
even to handle it, was there any plans made for them? Like, for example, in a wetland area, because there is no road to get into the wetland unless you go through all the local roads and then get in there. So it takes time for emergency vehicles to go there and then you guys to go there and deploy your emergency plan.
Well, if we were working in the wetland, we would have matted in there anyway. We would have access into the wetland, and if there was some type of an issue, we would remove the construction equipment and bring in any emergency response equipment that was
Right.
necessary.
This the construction equipment don't travel fast. They go slow. So your time of response will be depending on how fast you remove those vehicles out.
That would also isolate the situation.
Yes.
The operational pipeline system itself does have valving along the line. So in the event of an issue, we can isolate areas and then stop the flow of gas so that the gas no longer flows and then address the situation. But if there is a situation where something like that may occur, then our ability to isolate is very important. So that
So
would be
what-
the first course of action, is to isolate.
So what
the
kind of
situation.
safe distance do you have between the two valves?
I'm not
Between the two
Between the
what?
two valves, shut-off valves, how far are they?
That would be a question for our operations folks. As an environmental
I think-
specialist, I'm not
I
prepared to
understand,
answer
but
that.
if it's 2 miles long, then the entire area is under
No, I
your
I
isolated
understand.
area.
I understand your question.
That's what I wanted to know.
We can, you know, I don't typically come to Concom meetings prepared to answer questions
I
like that. But
understand.
we have our emergency response folks and our operations folks work closely with, you know, your town emergency folks, the police and fire every single day. So I mean, that's information that whatever you need, we can obtain that like the snap of our fingers.
Go on
So.
to the next one. You got any more?
And regarding your not using the alternative path was basically disrupting the traffic and then the public conveyance, that's what you had used. But in order to get into this wetland, you still have to use the public road and do it. So still be disrupting the entire town, people from using the roads, and also your vehicles go slow enough, so every day you have to move them, some of them have to be moved, kept outside. So that's, doesn't seem to be a reasonable thing to continue with. If you can take the alternate path, that would be better for us. And the other question I had was the soil compaction. When you use the heavy equipment in the wetlands, you compact the soil underneath it, and that will devoid the oxygen or reduce the amount of oxygen available for the microbes that live there. So, and then the recovery takes time for those soil compaction to come back. So how are you going to remedy that?
So I think that's part of the intent of the construction matting, is to, you know, equally distribute that weight a little more evenly to where what you just mentioned does not occur. And even if some of that does occur, it is inevitable, but like, you know, I'd say the proof is in the pudding, that we have photos that show, you know, even though when that does happen, after 1 or 2 growing seasons, the vegetation still comes back. So although some of that's inevitable, it doesn't fully inhibit you know, the vegetation's ability, or the hydrophytic vegetation's ability to come back after 1 or 2 growing seasons.
All right, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions, or?
We can move on to the next thing.
Okay. You wanna go on to the
Yeah, we can,
comments?
we can do that. Can you pull up the PDF?
Yeah, we can do that. Go through that. 12 that were not done yet. You said about 12, right?
There's about, I just counted, there's 20.
That just increased.
So this is the comment filing sheet that I submit. This is available online. If you have a smartphone, your computer or tablet with you, you can access this electronically. It will download as a Word document. Just go to Departments, click on Conservation, click on Current Projects, and underneath that tab, you'll see something that says Comments on Filings. It would be under item number 1G. That's what this form is here. So the first open comment actually goes to comment number 18. So if you can just scroll down to 18. Comment 18 really just has to do with flood storage and flood loss as proposed as part of this project. We asked Eversource, and by we I mean the town engineer, Evan White, and myself, to kind of go back and study analysis of flood storage and flood capacity a little bit further. And Evan's response is kind of toward the bottom of that comment number 18. Can you go scroll down toward 19? Okay, a little bit further up, just a tad. This was Evan's response back to a sheet that Eversource had submitted dated January 13th, which the commission has in their packets tonight. So from an email from Evan earlier today, the analysis in their response sufficiently illustrates that the installation of the pipe within the floodplain will have a minimal effect on flood water storage. I just wanted to bring it up as a point of discussion to the Conservation Commission because I wanted to see if the commission's satisfied with this and this response.
Yeah, I think we're fine
So
with that.
I'd also like to know how this ties into some of the trees that are already in the easement had to be removed, and was that also a consideration in evaluating flood storage? Would you expect any loss of flood storage with trees that transpire water being removed?
I mean, that wasn't considered as part of any analysis that we did. I mean, you are correct, there are some some trees that would be cut that are relatively small diameter that have grown up along the edges of the easement. But just, from my standpoint, that there's not a lot of them in there, and it's also going to be replaced by shrub and herbaceous vegetation that would also, be a user of water in the wetlands as well as trees. So I don't have any specific figures to point to on that, but I feel comfortable that that's not going to have any bearing on, by cutting trees within the easement, the limited number of trees, that it would result in a loss of flood storage in the floodplain.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to look at the next one?
Yeah, we can. Next open one is comment number 20.
Until the other tree grows up, yeah.
Yep, there it is.
Okay. Comment 20 got a little bit messy in a lot of respects, and the reason why I say that is because comment 20 goes into an initial a comment that I had to Eversource regarding their notice of intent, and 20 actually created a bunch of other additional comments and responses. You're going to see subparts to this comment where it's 20.5A and 20.5.B and C and D and E. And it was just because of the nature of the responses going back and forth between Eversource and myself. If you can you scroll down to the end of this comment? And there's quite a few pages in between. Okay.
Am I close?
I told you it got really messy. So A, B, and C under 20 have been closed out. What you see in front of you, 20.5, D, E, are really the ones that are open. And 20.5.E actually ties into another comment that we had. And 20.5.D was something that I was going to bring up to the commission. I'm just kind of reviewing my notes here, so just bear with me one moment.
Do you want him to go up to 20.5D?
Nope, I've got
No?
it
Okay,
right
you got it?
here.
Okay.
Your latest response, I believe, starts on page 21. I don't know if you want to scroll up to that page.
You said?
Yep.
D, there it is, yeah.
Okay. Actually, nope, sorry, 25. I was on the wrong page. Page number 25. Hard doing it on a smartphone.
That one right there, 5D.
Keep going.
What about that right there? It appears that the use of swamp marks, is that it? No.
Nope, toward the bottom of page 25.
No, there it is, right there.
Keep going.
Got it right there?
Yep, so this had to do with temporary workspace within our jurisdictional areas. During the evaluation of constructability, Eversource evaluated obtaining temporary construction easements adjacent to the existing permanent easement to expand the workspace with, but decided against this because of the additional environmental and property owner impacts such as land clearing and complex logistics involved with securing multiple new easements. This stemmed from the large wetland system that we see at the state park, within the Ashland State Park. I was asking Eversource if there was an alternative means or an alternative method that they could use that would minimize impacts to that wetland system, given how large it is. And one of the questions that I had asked was, could you potentially look at temporary easements? And this was kind of their response, and this was their response back. And I know this has been a little while since you've received this. I know I forwarded it to you last week. The commission also received this last week, and I looked at it again today. I just wanted to make sure that this was brought up during the hearing because it was one of the questions that I've asked a couple of different times, and I wanted to make sure that their response was presented during a hearing.
What exactly do you mean by temporary easement, though? Because,
So what I was getting at was trying to obtain a temporary construction easement that would allow them to work at a different capacity, but minimize impact to wetlands within the state park. But they were limited because of the site constraints, because of the easement, and the fact that a temporary construction easement would take a long period of time. And I'm not sure how long it would take you. I don't know if you want to comment back on this, Matt?
I can just kind of touch on the background of this. So, you know, the goal is to minimize the footprint of the project. We have, as you indicated, a permanent easement, 20 foot, 30 foot in a few locations. And Eversource, to work outside that, you would need to obtain temporary construction easement, which happens in can happen in larger projects too. But in this case, Sean and his team felt that, you know, by keeping it, number one, in the easement, you're minimizing the footprint of the work and not expanding it by moving out of the easement to increase the impact area of that. And then the other part of it too is the landowner component of it and having to secure additional easements from individual landowners outside of the permanent easement. Did you want to add anything, Matt?
Just add a couple things to what Mr. Paquette had mentioned. One thing I just want to be clear, I mean, even if we did need this additional workspace, which we feel we don't, it still wouldn't obviate the need to disturb the workspace. So it's kind of like to cut off your nose to spite your face saying, and it would involve, if this was in the state park and we needed to gain additional workspace, that would bring in the whole issue of Article 97 again. And then one thing DCR looks at when going through that process is there has to be no viable alternative that will result in less impact. And then you come back full circle. We have an easement, an area where the line already is. Why would we seek additional space outside of the easement anyway and just disturb additional land? So I guess I understand the perspective, but I don't think it would be beneficial to anyone really to seek additional workspace unless we actually found out that we needed it. And if we did get out there and found out we needed it, we would just have to stop and get those approvals at that time. But we really don't feel that that we need it.
go ahead, the next one, I think.
That's better. Does that explain it better, kind of where I was coming from and what I was asking? Okay.
So if you try to get the temporary easement, how long would it take for you to get it at that time, whenever you find it is needed?
It's a tough question, KG. It depends on many factors, quite frankly.
Range?
I would say and it depends on what exactly we'd be looking for, but if we wanted to like expand the easement area, you know, outside of the area we currently have the easement on, it could take years, 2 or 3 years, depending on the Article 9, what processes we needed to go through. And as Mr. Paquette mentioned, you know, any authorization from landowners, which sometimes we can't even get.
So you close down the operation till that time and then come back again and start working from the point where you left over, or what's the plan?
I'm not sure, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, if you find later on, say halfway through that you were there, then you say need a temporary easement, you go and apply for it, and you have to wait for years together. You shut down the remaining portion of the operation and then come back again afterwards and disrupt again, or what's your plan?
I mean, we'd have to cross that bridge when we come to it, and I mean, I think that just reinforces the importance of why we think we can do it in the easement, because if we couldn't, we would be doing this now, because quite frankly, we don't want to do that. We don't want to have to stop, wait to get authorization, and then come back years later.
Okay. Next one.
Okay, the next one on is 27, and this can be summarized fairly quickly. 27 starts on page 30. Okay. 27 is a comment related to Department of Conservation and Recreation. As some of you probably know, Ashland State Park is owned and managed by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So I wanted to make sure that correspondence between Eversource Conservation and DCR were consistent. And this really is more DCR's comment and responses back to Eversource. There was one that was open, if you want to scroll down to the bottom of 27. Keep going. Okay, keep going. I think it starts on 32. Okay, right there. Up a little. This was the latest response from Nathan Tipton from DCR, dated December 6, 2019. Have you been in touch with him since?
No.
Okay. You can go down to 40,
Comment 40, not page 40.
comment 40. This is the comment that I had mentioned back during comment number 20 that tied into 20.5.E. And this actually has to do with staging and stockpiling of the work. You responded back to my initial comment. That's your response down below there. I submitted a separate one that described kind of a meeting in August. And then your latest response actually starts on page 40. Okay, can you just read that?
The bolded response?
Yep.
Okay. A technical review meeting was held with the Conservation Administrator and Lucas Environmental. During that meeting, an alternative proposal was discussed to retain stockpiled soils on the equipment during trenching within wetlands. This measure involves installing reinforced super silt fence along both edges of the equipment mats along the easement edges. The silt fence is taller, so it will extend above the mats and is reinforced by chain link fence. This will provide a barrier for loose soils while still letting water pass and drain. Straw bales will not be used along the easement edges in lieu of this super silt fence installation. This also provides additional working within the easement on both sides of the trench.
This doesn't address the invasive seeds, though, that you also said in this.
No, it does not.
No.
I think it ties in later on,
Does it? Okay.
I think.
They say that they're going to put a wooden trough and store it inside before?
Initially, you were going to do some sort of trough to stockpile kind of those mushy wetland soils.
Right, we
but
had
you-
originally, we were thinking of that, but then based on our technical review meeting and input from Matt and
This
going
made
back,
more
this
sense.
is what we came up with for maintaining the soil within the workspace, within the easement.
What is the disadvantage in the trough method?
Just taking up space, the constructability of it, the extra duration of installing it there. We just felt like installing this silt fence, the whole point of this is to keep things from moving outside of the workspace into these unpermitted areas of the wetland. By installing the super silt fence with that rigid backing of the chain link fence on it, that will step up above the equipment mats. It'll keep stuff from going off the sides and keep it maintained within there. And we feel comfortable that this is a solution that maximizes the amount of space we have, because this also eliminates the need
Right.
to put hay bales along the edges, which take up, a 1.5 or 2 feet of width of workspace on either side, so.
Does this mean the chain link fence will be long?
Long in the sense of,
So that it doesn't permit the local habitants, like the animals, to go across around? Is there an issue with it?
it will be installed as a linear barrier along the edge of the workspace.
Correct.
Yes.
But if it is too long, then there is no path for the animals to cross around from one side to the other side.
Right, and I think at our last meeting, we had discussed,
Right, but I just
Um,
wanted to make sure that limited enough so that
yeah,
we don't put the animals to be an undue burden and then try to come to my backyard or somebody's backyard.
Right, I understood. You don't want the migration of salamanders into your backyard or something. But on the same token, by erecting the barrier, it'll keep things out of the workspace too. That could be, impacted from the equipment and the operation there, so.
That's safety for them, but the question is that if they're isolated to one side of it and they can't come inside, their usual habit of migrating is forbidden there, so that's what you need to avoid.
Right, so what are you asking?
So I just want to
me?
make sure to limit the length of the fence so that there's some way that the animal can find its path around the fence rather than miles-long fence.
Yeah, I mean, do you have any particular distance in mind? We can.
I am not a habitat expert, so
Okay.
we need to find out from them to find out how good and the best judgment that you can use.
Yeah,
So
I mean, we
evaluate
can
from them.
certainly, there are other ways too where you can offset the fencing as well to install gaps that would be farther on out of the workspace to allow for that. Did you want to say something, Matt?
We've worked with Natural Heritage, Mass Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program on this some. And first off, if there's a distance you want to see of contiguous fence, we can work to accommodate that through a condition. There's not really any limits with what we can install, how short or long it is. Those materials we can procure. Sometimes we can install the mats in such a way where they're timber, so there's gonna be some voids, not between the work area, but actually under the mats. Between, like, say, if this is the mats here and the wetlands under here, sometimes there are voids between the timbers where small critters can actually go through, and we've had that approved by Natural Heritage before. There's no rare species on this project site, but we could use similar methods for smaller frogs or toads or salamanders, whatever critters are out there in that wetland. For larger species, we would have to, as you mentioned, put in a certain linear length of fence, whatever the commission feels comfortable with, and then stopping it and starting it again.
Let's go back
Yep.
on to this. Go ahead, keep, what's the next one? Let's keep
So
moving
on the, just one quick
This is a lot.
question. Quick, so for the super silt fence, I know, Matt Verrill and I were going kind of back and forth, wondering whether or not you were going to attach the super silt fence to the swamp mats themselves, or if you were gonna bury them in the ground next to the swamp mats. Did we ever confirm that?
Well, the fence has to be installed with the posts, to give it the rigidity that's required. And the silt fence would also be placed like a standard installation. But we had discussed also using something as simple as a staple gun to secure the fencing right up against the edge of the mat to try to provide a seal there as well. And then also taking another piece of fencing, and you could even just lay it in as like an L shape on the inside of it too, to provide a little bit more protection as well. But in answer to your question, yes, we would do the installation into the ground, not just attach it to the mat edge.
Okay. Okay, next comment is 43. And 43 really just had to do with truck traffic and how they would kind of move around the swamp mats and their easement. It morphed into looking at the details of the plans that they submitted. So you had revised your sheets D190-36, D04A and D04B had been revised to include scales. And then our last set of comments to you said that more scales to additional plans were needed. Had that been done?
We had responded to and updated the last plan set that you have has the updated scales on all those typicals that we showed for the typical wetland crossings, the profile and plan views showing the detailed blow-ups. I think it's at a 10-foot scale, and so it's a pretty zoomed-in drawing as well. So from our standpoint, yeah, we have attached scales to all of those wetland and stream drawings.
And everything in those details are to scale?
Yes.
Okay. Moving on from 43 to 48. This is going back to stream stats. So does the commission recall kind of Matt Verrill and I and Eversource going over stream stats at the last meeting? Stream stats is a way that the commission looks at watershed size to determine if a stream is perennial or intermittent, meaning if it runs year round or if it ceases to flow throughout the year. So we had suggested that Eversource submit a table that outlines which streams were evaluated, if they met stream stats requirements, if they met legal requirements to be intermittent or not. And you have submitted that. I do have that as part of the December 6th filing. So I think this is all set at this point. I do think that you needed to submit potentially revised numbers for riverfront area, just because we changed a couple of streams from,
I think they did.
That was
They
part of
did.
the supplemental filing, yes.
That was in there.
okay.
I remember that.
Okay, so long as it showed an addendum to page 3 of the notice of intent, since those numbers need to be reflected, that's what I was kind of going at with this comment.
Okay.
So we're all set on section 1 of the comments. There's 7 different sections of these comments. Sections 2, 3, and 4, I'm not gonna go over because they were actually technically Matt Verrill's. And I can tell you that section 4 is actually closed, which had to do with wildlife habitat evaluation and study. So we can actually move on from, you're on section 1 now, we can move on to section 5.
Do you know what page or
Yeah, do you know?
I can tell you,
what page it needs to go to?
Section 3, okay, we're getting there.
Section 5.
Section
55, yeah.
Is this it?
Yep, that's
Yep.
it. There's a handful of these that are open, and this has to do with comments on the plans that you had submitted. And this is dated December 6th, so it's fairly recent. And the comments that are open are A, F, G, and H. You received this comment sheet on Friday of last week, so I doubt you had a chance to look at these and respond to them.
This comment here, please point out which sheets were revised to include, is that your latest comment right there? Please point out which sheets were revised to include this note?
Correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I
They have this if you need it.
Well, so they wouldn't have been able to answer this yet, really.
Not at this
So,
point,
what else is there besides this one?
Megan, if I could, what's the basis for that question? Is it just for purposes of your review, so you can go see what pages they are, or,
And ensuring that they were on every single sheet, making sure that they were repeated and nothing was missed.
okay, thank you.
We could put that in.
Okay, C is open, but I have it highlighted blue for Matt Verrill.
Okay. What's the other one? You said G.
And then G is closed out now. H,
guys.
page number 58. So you had revised this, and it looks like we're all set here. That sheet DO6 just had to deal with adding the trucks to the plan, adding scales. So H is actually now closed out.
Yeah, okay. Any more after that, or that's it?
No more.
Okay, all right. Guys, anything else at this point, or go to public, or
Do you have anything else, Mr.
anything else that you
Waldron?
guys wanna express?
I think, no, sir, I think we're all set at this time.
Okay. Anything that,
Are you expecting to close the hearing this evening?
Just based on, Sarah, I was just taking notes as we were talking, and I think, we've, based on the supplemental information we provided and the narrative revisions, calculations, artist renderings, photos, photos from the exact same line in the workspace, and the fact that we have our 404 and our 401 permits already, I think that would be our preference tonight, would be to do that, and here, based on that, we've just gone through all the comments and nothing really substantial is outstanding. So to answer your question, Mr. Hackins, I'd say yes, unless some other glaring omission comes up, but that, at this point, I think we would want to close. You know, we'd like to hear the public's comment as well.
And the public probably should know this as well, that these comments are the agent's comments and our peer review comments, not the comments of the commissioners. We haven't deliberated on this yet, so we've been listening to, for over a year, I think, to the presentations and listening to the public commentary and asking a lot of questions. But these particular points are Megan and Matt's points, not necessarily our points. And
Yes.
so do you want to have?
Yeah, and what I want to clarify before anyone stands up for public speaking, we need to stay on point. We need to make it be just about wetlands, and it really needs to be something that has not already been talked about here or by them or in previous meetings. So if it's something, you know, that really is necessary to say. You got that, Mark, too?
Yes, and I do, I'm gonna wait for the, I'm gonna
Go
wait.
ahead. Please give your name and address.
Mark Tassoni, 49 Hawthorne Road. First of all, this is a heck of a lot better than it was last time, because those comments and seeing what was scrolled up and reading along, that's transparency 100%, which I want to thank for, back and forth. Our town plan, our town conservation commissioner and Eversource responded, and to say that all those words, even though there's a lot of redactions, there was points there, which is how it should be. You have to understand what's worded and help everybody can read at all at the same time. They may not understand it, or they do. It's how they're gonna take it in, and I took it in as very informational, very transparent, and to the point. I'm not gonna talk about anything about wetland, I'm just gonna say positive. Other than what they showed on the slideshow, which was definitely out of state, not around here, we don't have mountains, we don't have a green forest, goes miles and miles. But I just wanted to make sure about the wetlands part and the stockpiling and the digging and everything. To KG, great questions about what if anything on ledge, anything could have any mishaps. Yeah, I want to understand and basically hope that the rest of the people can see it. It's going to be a pain. And if we should have the town of Framingham help pay Ashland back on this, because it has nothing to do with us in town.
Mark, that's not a point. Come on. Do you have a question?
You'd be
Or
surprised.
nothing
You'd be surprised at the question. The wetlands are worth saving, but the comments after mine are worth saving more.
Okay. Thank you. Name, address, please.
Hi, Diane Ring, 42 Bay Colony Drive. Is it okay to just state a concern relating to a question that was raised this evening? Thank you. So, KG, you mentioned some concern about how quickly police and fire or disaster or emergency equipment would be able to access the wetlands. And Mr. Waldrop respectfully said that they had a plan together to deal with that. My concern is that this past July, in the Metro West Daily News, there was a big article about how Eversource had not stayed in good touch with the fire chief in Hopkinton about a problem at the LNG tanks, which is different than pipeline, but it's communication, and so that's just a very deep concern that I have. Thank you.
Yep. Anyone else? Name and address, please.
Hi, Ken Shelton, 20 Treasure Way. The possible disasters to the natural beauty of the town of Ashland are not written in cement, but certainly possible on so many levels. I'm sure the gentleman who spoke from Eversource meant what they said here and now and today, but they are employees of Eversource, and as bumps and glitches arise in things, we have no guarantees of what they said will be held to any legal standards. I have an overall general question, and that is, I'm sure I was not I've been living here for 6.5 years, and I believe this went into effect, this whole project went into effect before I was even a resident here. My question is, a project that benefits Hopkinton and Framingham, and ultimately, when the costs are paid off, to the Eversource Corporation and their stockholders, what exactly is in this for Ashland? Is there anything? Extra trucks standing by in case there's a disaster? Is that what we were doing this for? Why wasn't this planned parallel to the Mass Pike? Would have hurt minimal private businesses and property owners. We saw a lovely presentation of all the workmen doing their best to maintain the beauty of whatever city or state that video presentation was from, but that did not show houses, backyards, main streets, highways that will be impacted here.
But this is just about the wetlands, so
And the wetlands. Thank you.
you're welcome. Thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Shelton, just to put it in a little bit of perspective, there are parallel applications for this project. Mr. Shelton?
He was-
Yeah. No, you're not hearing things. No, there are parallel applications. Some people are aware of this, some not. One is a general application to the Facility Siting Board, and that's a state agency. And that takes into account all of the things that you referred to. That's beyond the purview of the Conservation Commission. That's the Select Board and the Town Manager's Office. That application, to my knowledge, is still pending. There is a separate issue in land court that is still pending as well. What's before us this evening, we are restricted by the State Wetlands Protection Act and the Ashland Wetlands Bylaw. And our purview doesn't go beyond that. So when we, in the answer to your question of what's in it for the town, with regard to what's before us tonight here, we can't really say anything, you know. What potentially would be in it for the town as a whole is a question for the Select Board, and they're meeting Wednesday, and I believe this is on their agenda on Wednesday, and for town management. We would like to, I guess as citizens, we think of those things as well, but that's not what we're charged with here as the Conservation Commission. We're bound by the limits of those two, that law and that statute.
Go ahead, name, address, please.
Joel Arbeitman, Woodridge Lane in Ashland. The Eversource, a fossil fuel company, has sent their soldiers here to answer these questions. A lot of responses were given, and I just wanted to share my preference for which I thought was the most telling response. There was a discussion as part of the comments that we went through about, I believe the phrase was a temporary construction permit, which would, my understanding was it would provide an additional easement to facilitate the construction process. And the good news was that these gentlemen here indicated that they probably didn't plan to need that. But more telling was their comment about Article 97. They said, and they made it very clear, you know, they gave some specifics, but they made it very clear that that's not something, a process they wanted to engage in. And I just would encourage the commission to reflect on that. You know, if they are concerned about whether the state legislature, which I believe oversees grants under Article 97, if they are concerned that the potential damage to the wetlands in a state park yet might preclude their obtaining this temporary permit. Granted, they haven't asked for that. I think that truthfully tells their assessment of what damage is really potential here to the wetlands. They wouldn't have been quite as uncomfortable if they thought this would have been an easy go and that there were no environmental issues to worry about here. They sounded definitely concerned to me. Thank you.
Thank you. Name and address, please.
Hi, Charles Lids, 150 Oregon Road in Ashland. So I was puzzled about something. Is it correct that we don't know where the current pipeline runs? I mean, except that it's in the easement?
Yeah, you can.
No, we do know where the current line is. It does just meander throughout the easement. As Mr. Stanley mentioned earlier, due to proximity to, you know, obstructions or ledge, when this line was installed, they had to meander a little bit to install it. But there are pipeline markers now along the easement that demarcate every so many feet where the line is, and we have the ability internally to go out and, you know, mark even more precisely within those locations, and that would be done come construction.
Okay, thank you. Anything else, sir? That's it. Okay, thank you. No one else? Okay, thank you. Gentlemen, anything else? Oh, sure.
Nancy Moscato, 73 Braeburn Lane. I'd like to know what happens next. I mean, it appears that you're ready to close out tonight, but without any determination of what the commission feels. So I'm just wondering what's the process? What happens next?
It's pretty typical for the Conservation Commission to close the hearing, and then at the next meeting, they look at a draft order of conditions. Keep in mind, an order of conditions can be issued for either approved with conditions to do the work or denied because of a lack of information.
Okay.
But let me just comment on that. We would close the hearing if that's what Eversource wishes. We would then deliberate as a commission, and then we could vote tonight, or we could vote at a subsequent meeting. We have to render a decision in 21 days. If we approve with conditions, we would go forward in the manner that Megan suggested. If it were denied, then that would not be necessary. Then the next step would be in Eversource's court.
Okay, so the choices are you approve with conditions?
Or we deny.
You out and out approve it without conditions, or you reject it, is that right?
You would
Well,
always
I don't think
approve
we've
with
ever
conditions.
approved anything without conditions.
Yeah, we would always have
All right,
conditions.
so either approve with conditions or
Deny.
deny.
Mm-hmm, correct.
Okay, and you would announce that at the next meeting, is that what happens?
Well, we would announce it if we decided to vote tonight, we
It
would
would depend
have
on
a result
when we
tonight.
decide.
We haven't deliberated yet as a Conservation Commission.
Okay, should we be waiting around to determine what your?
Well, I think it's probably
Decision is?
worth, if you've been here to this point, and we close the hearing, it's probably worth waiting to hear what we have to say.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I did have a question that's somewhat related to this young lady's question as well. I was gonna ask about the deliberation too. Does the board feel that they would deliberate tonight while the meeting's open, or what would your process be? Would you typically deliberate after a close? Just a
We'll
cross procedure?
deliberate after a close.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Do you have any comment on that?
No, I think, I just was curious what the board's process was. I would just want to make sure that we have exhausted all of our ability to answer any questions you have, and I wouldn't want the board to because my understanding is we wouldn't be able to speak once the meeting's closed, and if the board did have questions after that point, we wouldn't be able to respond. So I just wanted to make sure that we have the ability
Yep.
to answer any questions you have.
Yeah, we can't take any public comment or any
Yes.
evidence after the hearing is closed.
Okay.
I got one more short, very short.
There's still
Well,
somebody up there, Mark.
There is some right there.
Did that answer the question, Mr. Wallner?
Yes, I had another question that slipped my mind. Okay, it will come back to me, I'm sure. Thank you.
Name and address, please.
Ed Hart, I live in Nancy Drive, Ashland. I just had a couple of quick questions. You mentioned the hearing is closed, then we can't make any more comments. Does that preclude written comments? I mean,
Yeah,
say,
it
for
precludes
example,
any comment. yeah.
I'm,
We can't take that into consideration once the hearing is closed.
once the hearing is closed, and you're talking about closing it tonight.
Probably, yes.
Okay, and the selectmen are gonna close theirs on Wednesday, you think?
I'm sorry?
You said the selectmen are meeting on Wednesday, and they're going to maybe close their hearing on Wednesday?
Well, they don't have an open hearing before them.
Okay.
They have it on their update,
Yeah,
I believe, agenda.
okay.
Eversource does have the right to keep this open if they want to, right?
Yeah, we can't close it without their permission.
Right.
Okay.
But also, he could comment to the ESB as well, if you wanted to comment.
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Is that it, Ed?
Well, you
Said
know,
you had two
you and
questions.
I have talked a lot, and I know everybody on the board. I've been in construction my entire life. You know, I'm 71. I started working when I was 9. I see this problem, too many problems to even talk about, and you're speaking specifically about wetlands. You know, I have a degree in biology, and I have a lot of questions about that too, but I prefer to put them down in writing and submit them to the board so that you could consider them, because I don't want to take up the time tonight. I came directly from work. I'm a little tired. So, but I didn't know you were going to close the meeting tonight, so.
We've been meeting quite a bit.
Well, you know, it's been open for,
I know.
Quite a
if not
while.
over a year,
Yeah,
at least a
right,
year. I
yeah,
think our
yeah.
first meeting was in, maybe in December of 2018.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
I think Matt had something still. Forget. Please make it short, Mark.
I'm gonna make it short. I'm gonna try.
Okay.
Mark Sony, I'm gonna make this very short because it's attempted to be closed tonight, and the board, and the select board has it on the agenda Monday, this coming Wednesday, excuse me. Is there, once you do what you do tonight, can there be an in-between office with town management meeting before, that they can talk of what was discussed? And throughout, when the select board brings it up, can get information both ways, and have the select board come up with, and they, what was a recap of what happened tonight in their boards. So you get the town transparent of what in between tonight and Wednesday night.
I'm sure they'll hear about it.
The select board has much broader jurisdiction, Mark, than we do. So their commentary will be on everything that I described about 15 minutes ago, all three of those actions. They also have the authority to speak independently with Eversource about how to address this thing instead of in an adjudicatory manner. They do not have jurisdiction over what we're deciding tonight, but they do have authority to either support us or not support us in whatever decision that we make going forward. Does that make sense?
Makes a lot of sense. It's a two-way road, open to everybody.
Okay, anything? Yeah. Did you have another one?
No,
Another
I was just
question?
gonna request that you close if there's no other comment, but I had a couple things I was just gonna say.
Go ahead.
Before, so I just, I appreciate, I just wanted to first thank the board for your, and the peer reviewer and Megan for your diligent review of our application. I know we submitted, probably an understatement to say significant amount of information. I know it's a very intricate project, and I also want to thank the public. I appreciate everyone coming out, and we hear your concerns and take them very seriously. And I hope that's evident by us continuing to come to the board and meet before them for a year plus. I just going through all my notes. I was talking with Rick and Ken, and we think that, we've exhausted all of our abilities, I guess, to provide all the information we have at this point. And so, if there's no other questions from the board, we'd respectfully request through the chair that you close, and we look forward to your deliberation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. What do you think, guys?
Thank you.
Hmm?
Okay, I'll make a motion to close the hearing.
I second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
You have your closed hearing. Okay.
Okay, I would suggest that we deliberate this evening.
It's fine, it's fine.
Okay, I
Okay.
agree.
Mhm.
Think
Wanna
so.
start,
Yeah.
KG?
You wanna start, KJ?
To my knowledge, whatever the information that they have given doesn't satisfy my needs to protect the environment, and I think I am totally opposed to this project. It doesn't yield enough protection for our wetlands in our town, and I think I'm not in favor of it as of this moment, looking at all the data.
None. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to take a step back, because we really have two issues before us. We have our Ashland wetlands bylaw, as well as the notice of intent, and they're kind of connected in the sense that the petition for the waiver on the wetlands bylaw is within the notice of intent. So I think that we should really focus in on talking about our
25
wetlands
foot.
bylaw
Yep.
before. I think that takes a priority because of the home rule authority, that's gonna trump the notice of intent, so
Mhm.
that's gonna kind of, so I'd like to kind of talk more about that and
ahead.
the criteria for getting a waiver. So does anyone agree or disagree? Should
Yeah,
we-
let's just clarify for the public that in this application, there is a request for us to issue a waiver to our local bylaw, which contains a 25-foot no disturb zone that's not included in the state statute. That's what you're referring to?
Yeah, exactly.
And there are parameters for that.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
And, sure, I mean, I
Go
have it
ahead.
in front of me, so.
Go for it.
One of the, yeah, so, in order to get a waiver, there's certain conditions that need to be satisfied, and, one that has come up a lot is, we can allow, a waiver to this 25-foot no disturb zone. But it's really, in order to get a waiver, we have to have, no practicable alternative to going into the wetland. And that petition has to be in writing in the notice of intent. And we really had looked over a lot of information that didn't make it unfeasible to stay out of the wetlands. So I think that that is one of the issues that this could be turned down, is that there is another way to go around the wetland. I know that many of the other, there's been some other alternative means, but I think between, I think staying out of the wetlands at the state park, it would be a prudent thing to do. I think it makes me very uncomfortable that there's only one, it's such a long run. There's a lot of water there, and it's also one way in and out. And it just seems like a high-risk proposition. Also, DCR right now is allowing them to go through, giving them an access permit based on a revocable special permit that was granted back in the early 70s. And right now they're petitioning to get that a more permanent easement established. And for that, for the negotiations with DCR, it involves a land transfer in Deerfield to help with a parking lot at the Mount Sugarloaf, and also financial compensation. So to go from the special permit to a more permanent easement, there's compensation involved, there's land and money. And for us, Ashland, to permit this, we are here as residents and we're not getting any compensation for it. So that's a big issue for me. So, and also within our bylaw, we can either accept that it is the same or better. We can ask for an enhancement in wetland interests, and I think that we should hold the bar higher and not just go with a restoration as is. So I think we haven't really touched upon what would enhance the wetland interests. I'd mentioned last meeting that perhaps working with DCR to perhaps make it a pedestrian way, bog bridges, just something for the town, but so far nothing's really been offered. So that's sort of where I stand right now. So take any more?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. I would also like to thank the representatives from Eversource. It's been a long process. I am particularly appreciative in the last two hearings to Mr. Paquette bringing the slideshow that gave examples of how this might look if it were to be undertaken. I'm sure it's been stressful for you. It's been stressful for us. We have poured through many of these volumes to try to come to some kind of a solution here. And I think that it needs to be clarified that what's before the Conservation Commission tonight is not whether there should be a pipeline, but whether the pipeline should follow the path that they've chosen. And I think that's a real clear delineation. Whether there should be a pipeline is the subject for a discussion before the Board of Selectmen, for the Siting Board, not before this commission. Again, we are restrained by the purview that we are given. I'd just like to, if you'll indulge me for a minute, review a little bit. I do have a summary here, but in essence, what is before us is a pipeline that goes from Hopkinton to close to 126 in Ashland. And in their presentation, in Eversource's presentation, they presented several alternatives that they considered. We talked about this last time. I believe that there were 6 of them. And they were all weighted differently with regard to traffic and noise and location proximate to schools. And wetlands was one of the things that, that was evaluated. And most of these proposals had at least partially of an aspect of being in the right-of-way of the road, which said to me that it's possible to put this in the right-of-way of the road. The route that's been chosen, and many of the other routes that started in the street, take a right turn about where the Valentine Estate is on 135 and runs cross-country for about a mile. It's 0.98 miles to Chestnut Street. And the work that they're proposed, that goes through what's referred to in the notice of intent as impact areas 4, 5, and 6. And impact areas 4, 5, and 6 contain probably 90% of the wetland consideration that we've been evaluating. In that mile of cross-country, there are several stream crossings, but the one that we were focusing on tonight and that we have, that we find challenging, I think, is Cold Spring Brook, which is the stream that comes out of the spillway of the Ashland Reservoir, if you've ever been to the Ashland Reservoir. This has to go underneath that, and in order to do that, they have to get that water around where they're excavating. All of this has to be done within a 30-foot easement. They have presented to us how that might be done. And as Mr. Waldrop said, they have provided a lot of information on how they think that might be done. Again, there are two laws that are applicable before us tonight. And one is the Wetlands Protection Act, which is the state law. And they, Eversource has proposed this as a limited, what's called a limited project under the Wetlands Protection Act. And what a limited project does that's before, a normal limited project would require the applicant to provide alternatives to the project. In this case, because of the wording of the Wetlands Protection Act, Eversource is exempt from that requirement. But I would suggest that although they are exempt from that requirement, they're not exempt from the entire Wetlands Protection Act, which has 8 different values. One of them, and probably the most prominent in this project, is wildlife habitat. We've spent a lot of time talking about wildlife habitat here and comparing the wildlife habitat evaluation that was presented to us and the wildlife evaluation that we had done by our peer review. And also, many of us have unscientifically walked this area. For some of us for years, some of us many times during the last year. Again, wildlife habitat is one of the values of the Wetland Protection Act that we're charged with enforcing, that, at least in my opinion, is still something that we should be required to enforce here. Moving to the town bylaw. The town bylaw has, as my colleague referred to, has a 25-foot no disturb zone. And that's more strict than the wetlands law at the state level. We are allowed by this bylaw to, again, to waive the disturbance of the 25-foot no disturb zone if, and let me read the exact language here. It says, the applicant shall provide information and evidence deemed satisfactory by the commission that the work to be performed sufficiently protects or enhances wetland interests. Well, again, one of those wetland interests, and probably the most prominent in this case, is not necessarily flood control, but is wildlife habitat. In their own weighting system of all the alternatives, the alternative that they have chosen is the most impactful on wetlands. Given the fact that wetlands are the only variable that we are considering before here, their presentation hasn't risen to the level where I'm not concerned that there's going to be irreparable harm to the wetland area for a number of the reasons that we spoke about. One, probably the most pressing, is that it's a mile of cross-country with no road access, or very little road access. So if something were to go wrong out there, it would take an awful long time to respond. This isn't like going off the Mass Pike and having people just fly down the Mass Pike and throwing out something to corral this stuff. Another issue that I've had during this whole deliberation, and it's not the fault of Eversource because they've done what they have to do by statute, but what they have presented to us is the impact in the 30-foot easement. The problem with an impact of a 30-foot easement through a wet area is that you can't measure the impact outside of that 30-foot easement. In upland, you can, because if something goes wrong, it's staying there. In a wetland, it's flowing down gradient. And although there's only a 30-foot easement that runs through this wetland, there are vast amount of wetlands that are down gradient from where this trench is going to be, which includes the Willow Swamp across the street from the Kittafenwall that some of you may be familiar with on Main Street, and eventually the Sudbury River, and it's all connected. And if something were to fail, all of that area would be impacted. So again, what's before us, at least in my perspective, is not whether there should be a pipeline, but whether there should be a pipeline that runs through that area. Yeah. And I'm not convinced that even with their best efforts, that they can guarantee that there won't be a problem. And I don't think that we, as the town of Ashland, are staffed with the people that can monitor this effectively to make sure that if something did happen, it would be contained.
Right. No, I agree. I don't disagree with any of what you've said either. Where do we want to go from here, you guys?
Do you have anything to add?
I don't think so. You guys have pretty much said them all. Between the two of you, three of you. I agree with it.
Well,
I think that the habitat is very important.
Let me just say one thing, if we're going to take a vote or something, that this has been a problem with previous hearings, is we still are in session. When this hearing is over, we still have business and we're being televised. So if you are not staying for what we have business for subsequent to this, if you could leave in a somewhat orderly fashion, quietly, and not approach the table here.
Correct.
We'd appreciate
Thank you.
All right, if our colleagues are ready to make a decision here, I'm more convinced by the argument that put by Carl and Greg that I propose that we deny the applicant based on the Wetland Protection Act as well as the local bylaws.
Is that your motion?
That's a motion, yes.
Okay.
Will you take a vote?
Need a second?
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Any opposed? Abstained? Oh, okay. Motion carries.
Can you say it one more time? What was the motion?
Denied.
under both
KG.
laws.
And we
Greg
all-
seconded it.
4-0.
Okay. Who made the motion?
I made the motion.
KG.
And then Greg seconded
Greg
it.
seconded.
Can I get a recess for 5 minutes? Do I need to leave it?
Appeal
No,
periods, just so you're aware, DEP has a 10-day appeal period, the Wetlands Protection Bylaw has a
Can I
60-day
also
appeal
recess?
period to Superior Court.
Can we recess for 10 minutes?
He needs to go.
No.
Exit stage,
You get-
right?
Second the motion.
We're still on
Second.
TV, right?
Yeah. Recess, I need a recess for 10 minutes.
Just a 5-minute recess?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking? Okay.
Yeah, but the other guys can come back, right?
They can come.
Huh?
Let me have them come in.
Yeah, they can
Yeah.
come back, so you can,
Okay.
it still would be quorum. Need to?
No.
Do you need to leave?
I need
Okay.
to go home.
Me too. Do you want some water?
No, if you, when do you wanna call in Jean and Bill?
She is. She just went out to get them. She just went to get them. Good night.
Good night.
No, you guys have said it very succinctly. I didn't need to.
Hey, welcome back.
Phew. We're still on.
Did you get Jean, Meg?
did, but he said go to DOT and then he'll come in.
Oh,
Go to DOT.
He's recused from that too.
It's just a recusing machine.
you're talking about the informal discussion? Oh, see, we have a quorum,
Yes.
right? Or not?
Yeah, we have one.
We do,
The
yep.
informal discussion.
Oh, no, KG has to come back.
Wait, should wait for him.
I'm not sure if I can, I think it's best if I just
Okay, do we have anything else?
Are you kidding or are you serious?
You're gonna what?
Actually, I probably can.
Yeah, you're not recused from this, right? And you were
Yeah.
here when the
Well, I didn't know, I wasn't here at the last meeting.
permit was issued, you weren't here.
Permit was issued, so it may
Right, but
be
this is
better-
an informal discussion. You can be part of that.
Yeah.
Yes, I can be part of it, but I think
Right.
maybe for voting wise, I'm not
In
really
an,
sure if
why would
that's-
we vote in an informal discussion though?
Well, if we're gonna make, some adjustments.
Should I grab Jean first? We'll do some of the administrative stuff and then go back to DOT.
You could do that, yeah.
Okay, let me grab
You
him.
could
get
go
him
tell
outta
him
here.
that, yeah.
So, yeah, he can leave.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that much left of the administrative stuff. So we got this OOC, we do this guy. Right. Oregon Road. It's not good for you.
Okay,
Oh,
KG's back.
KG's back anyway.
All right, back in session.
Well, we're gonna do the administrative stuff and then do the DOT. Right, that's what we're being kind.
Okay, and then there's some announcements I need to give too.
Okay, keep in mind, we're still on.
That's, yeah, we're still on, we're on still. You wanna do the OOC?
Yeah, let's do the OOC for
117?
117 Oregon Road.
I think, yes, you wanna add the bounds. I think the bounds make sense there.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
do it, I think that
All right,
makes
where are we,
sense.
which one are we talking about?
117 Oregon Road, review draft order of conditions.
You
Should
have
be
it
to the
there
back
in
of your
the back.
packet. Unless you got it out of order.
You okay with that?
Yeah, well,
No, I got it here somewhere.
it was in the thing that was here this evening.
Did you take mine?
Again?
What are we doing again, Oregon Road?
Yeah,
Yes,
but-
117
Yes,
Oregon
we
Road.
want bounds.
Here, you can look at
Yes,
mine.
I agree.
Oh, you got it right there?
No, that's his.
No, I have another one.
Yeah, you took
You
mine.
too?
Well, I should have
You
kept it in
two
front of
have
you.
to stop
Instead of
taking
putting
each
it over
other's
and
stuff.
pushing everything over on me.
Okay, yes, we do want bounds.
Okay, do we want bounds? Because we did not discuss it during the hearing, and where the bounds would go would be in an existing pre-disturbed area that's grass. Actually, the septic system isn't part of it. So how do you want to go about the bounds for 117 Oregon Road?
Where can they be installed?
Well, if it's been a disturbed area in the past, we've put it at the wetland line.
Yeah, so have them put
So-
them at the wetland line? Okay,
Okay.
How many are we talking about? How many bound, I don't have a plan, so. Sorry about that, people.
what was the
It's
highlight?
quite a long property, so there'd be quite a few. I don't know if you want to limit it to just the front of the property or go all the way
This is-
back.
This is like a blow up at the restaurant, is it?
That is the Oregon Club.
Yeah. Parking area, so it'd go over here.
So the septic is
Well,
actually,
that's the septic system.
yeah, the septic is actually outside. The current septic system that's going to be abandoned is in our jurisdiction. So the wetland lines are
It's a cesspool, isn't it?
cesspool, sorry.
Oh, here's the-
So I need to change the findings of fact then, because right now it's a septic system.
They're going to abandon the well also.
Say again?
They're going to abandon the well also, which is also in the wetlands again. Some code product.
What is it? It comes all the way out to here. And what's this hat? What's this patch that looks like rocks?
Stone pavement.
It's a stone paved, stone type patio, but more expansive than that. I don't know how to explain it. It's late.
Is it a parking area? Is it a parking area?
There's a parking area
It is
right
a-
next to
Right.
where the septic system's gonna go.
I thought the parking was on this side of the restaurant.
It is. It's where the septic system is going.
Chair.
Yeah. We've got east and west.
That is Carl's chair. That is his
I don't
chair.
know if you really,
He uses that one. He doesn't like this.
And we'll put it in between.
What's all of this?
that's woods, isn't it? No,
It's
this
woods?
is woods. This is woods,
Yeah, that's the edge of woods right there.
Looks like some kind of patio.
And I can't offer you any insight because when I went on there, there was snow on the ground.
Well,
I think just the impacted areas.
well, it's over here, and the wetland's over here. It's not even.
Here's the 25.
That's the
But-
wetland line.
But here's the 25 there. So, you're gonna be putting it within the woods?
Is that the 25?
Yeah.
So it goes through one of the cesspools.
Mm.
So put it behind
Put
it
it
then.
right there,
Put it behind it then, yeah,
right here.
along the wetland line or something.
I mean, do you really need to do it
No.
back in here, or?
I would say no.
All right, so putting one off of opposite flag number 3 and flag number 1, is that what you're suggesting? One here and one here?
Yeah.
Or he's
At the
putting next to this.
25-foot no disturb zone.
Yeah.
Bounds on flag 3 and 1.
It's ER.
Well, one's out in the woods.
Are they going to put the flags first
No,
and
no,
then
well,
work
yeah.
on it?
2 and 3.
Well, that would put it next to the septic
Are they going to
system.
put the
Yeah, they're gonna get rid of the
flags
septic
first
system.
and then work on
The flags are there, aren't they?
Yeah, the flags are
I
out.
don't know if they're digging it up, are they?
So
Just
one
gonna crush it.
opposite 3, one opposite 2. 2 is gonna be right near one of the septic systems. one of
The
the
cesspool.
cesspools.
But that they're going to abandon that by crushing it, so they're going to disturb that area.
But right on the wetland line, we could put one.
Well, no, we'd put on the 25-foot no disturb zone is what we're suggesting.
If we can, yeah, and if not, further out.
fall within this disturbed area already. Depends on what you
Erosion
want to do.
control measures, oh, okay, that's what EROS is. Okay. You got that?
So,
Opposite wetland
1 and 2?
and wetland 3, flag 2 and flag 3 at the 25-foot no disturb zone.
Say it one more time.
At flag 2 and flag 3 on the 25-foot no disturb zone line.
Okay. Thank you. Got it.
But that, that's a condition, where are we putting that? If you had a,
I think I did leave a space for where it could go. Maybe I didn't. Hang on.
What was the highlighted thing on C, or?
Nope, I didn't. I can put it in, that's easy. What did you say, highlighted thing on C?
Yeah, on the next page there, 9B, C, at the top there, you have highlight, in addition, the applicant shall comply with state, and what's that, why is that?
So the first part of that condition has been a standard condition. I was corresponding with Mark because, you know, he's obviously involved because of the abandonment of the cesspool. So I just added, in addition, the
Okay.
applicant shall comply. So that highlighted is just added on to this particular permit.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's actually considered both cesspool as well as wetland, the well also.
Yep.
Abandoning that also is considered both.
Any conditions that you want to remove or change?
looking through 'em.
Did you get, you have it in pink, did you get information from Evan or not?
I did not. Again,
Okay.
these are the conditions that he added to our standard template, so I just
Uh-huh.
kind of copied our standard template. These weren't from him directly, they were from him when reviewing our standard template.
From who?
Evan?
Oh,
Are there any of these really in this, though? In this property?
I was wondering that, that's why I highlighted them and said, speak to Evan.
I would say no. On all of these.
On
but-
all of them?
Yeah, I think so. Anybody else, or what do you think?
why, I'm sorry, what do you,
The pink highlights that
Oh,
she's got?
Page 9D.
I haven't gotten there yet.
No, okay. The rest of the stuff is pretty much Suffolk.
Why is the condition says read and post order? What does post order mean?
Where are
Don't they
you?
have to put the
Number
DEP number
25.
outside?
That's just always been a standard condition.
It's referred that way?
Yeah, it's always been that way.
Yeah, it has.
What does post mean?
To post it on site, have it on site at all times.
The
That's
order
how
of
I always
conditions?
That's how I always interpreted it.
Isn't it really to put the DEP number up or something?
No, that's separate.
No,
So when I came on, this was already an existing condition within the template here. The way that I had interpreted this was that the order needed to be available kind of on site.
And to make sure also that the developer and contractor have it. That's the other thing.
Right.
I think that's why we like
To
that.
me, posting means you gotta put it up.
Post it, yeah,
Put it up.
yeah.
And we don't, I've never heard of anyone putting up an order of conditions, like on a board or something.
I actually
think
did
it
in
was-
Framingham.
Really?
We
Oh.
did.
You did?
We did.
You do, on all jobs, they did?
No, on a few of them
Oh.
for the state college.
I think it just means to have it on hand, not necessarily.
Have it
post.
readily
That's what
available.
the condition says.
Right, so it just needs to change the wording of what it,
That's a part of the
order
construction.
available on site, it could be instead.
Um,
If If we get a
We
lighter
gotta find a
agenda,
different word for that. That wording doesn't make any sense to me.
when we have a lighter agenda, hopefully this
could go
winter,
through
we
it,
should
yeah.
revisit the standard template and take out some stuff.
Yeah.
They're a bit dated.
But we can go through for now and just, it's not gonna hurt anything. But
Um,
the three that she has in pink, I'm wondering if it really needs to be there.
Said it doesn't need to be there?
I don't know,
Sorry, I missed
does
that.
it?
Okay.
It doesn't seem that it would be necessary on this site.
Yeah.
Seems, I don't know that there's
Anytime,
that many slopes
Megan,
or.
you have a
stuff.
condition with a number in it, that's referring to another condition of a certain number, like this one, I mean, you haven't highlighted it, but I don't know what is like between here and there, but if anything changes, that condition number is gonna change.
Yeah.
So, before you finalize these things, you gotta do a global search for condition, the word condition.
Yep, I do.
And then make sure that all the numbers are sequenced properly.
I do. After I finish drafting the order of conditions, I go back and review all the, anything that's highlighted as condition or condition number and change the numbers as needed for reasons like that.
Number 30 should stay for stockpiling.
You think that one, there will be
Yeah,
that,
they
you
will
think?
be stockpiling, because they have
Yeah.
to dig out the,
There aren't that
leaching
many
field.
slopes on there though, right?
No, it's a fairly flat site.
yeah,
Yeah, so we can take
so
out
if you had a heavy
that
rain.
one, and the rock construction entrance, I don't think is really that's not usually for a small site like that, right?
I actually had thrown that at Evan a couple of times because one of the things that I wanted him to realize is that we deal with a vast majority of types of projects, and some of the more common ones are single-family homeowners that are just doing an addition, and he still advocated for a rock construction entrance at those areas too.
Wow.
But I'll run it by him again.
Yeah, that's gonna become much more,
Oh, really? The
yeah,
rock?
even installing erosion controls in upland areas.
MS4 permit requires us to kind of like add these things in.
So maybe that's why, yeah.
There's gonna be a lot
Maybe.
more
Okay, well,
rigorous
let's,
erosion control required.
well, we can take out 29 at least. We don't need that one.
So 28 is still in,
Yeah, I guess, from what Gene is saying, yeah.
No condition
okay,
to
but 29
snow
is out.
storage.
I don't know where snow storage, I think it's at the end, isn't it?
No, I don't see it.
It should be at the end, usually.
Oh, there it is,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's at the end.
This is, I mean, is there any slope on this site?
No,
Well, that's why we
It's
were
flat.
taking that one out. 29, removing that one.
29's out.
Okay.
We'll leave the other two in.
You really think they're gonna have enough soil out there that's gonna make a pile 20 feet high?
I know,
really
I
don't.
was surprised. I didn't think so. You were saying it might, but I don't know.
I don't know, 20 feet's a
If they
big,
do.
20
then they-
feet's a
what they have
big
to do.
pile of dirt.
Yeah, it's a really big pile, but.
Well, what if they-
Okay. The stabilizing stockpiles, if they're inactive for 14 days, is an EPA requirement.
Really? Wow.
Do you see that somewhere? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, in that one that you have.
Last sentence there.
Yeah.
Should we just cross out the whole thing and just say stockpiled soil on site shall be stabilized? If the stockpiles remain inactive for more than 14 days?
You kind of have that too under soil stabilization, by the way. Almost the same thing.
Yeah, I think I'd copied it.
32 kind of has the same thing.
So
Doesn't say the pile, but it's 14 days.
32 soil stabilization is our standard.
Kind of,
Yeah, but this isn't referring to stockpiles.
no.
It can.
Disturbed soil.
Right, that's
No, I
stockpile.
know, but it's,
Should be something specific for.
But you were saying you didn't think they would have 20-foot stockpiles. But this says that if the soil is disturbed, they do have to do something within 14 days anyway, still. In that other, in the soil stabilization one.
Stockpiles shall be a maximum, that means you still can have a stockpile and you probably
It's
still need to.
just smaller.
It's
Yeah.
just, it can't
no,
go
I know,
higher
I'm,
than
I'm
20
not
feet.
suggesting that you can't use that wording, I'm just looking at it going, God, if they have a 20-foot stockpile,
Yeah, they might. They're putting the septic system.
they're
Yeah.
not gonna have a stockpile 20 feet high. When you dig a cellar hole for a house, you don't
It's
end
not
up with
even
a
20 feet,
stockpile 20
no.
feet high.
Yeah. Rodenheiser might.
Yeah.
They might
You
have
can
it.
do it.
You could have a
Um,
20-footer.
Well, let's leave it in.
I don't care if it's in.
Yeah, leave it in.
Okay.
The rest, to me, looks fine, I think.
Just add a condition number for bounds, right?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Easy enough, okay.
I thought the rest looked good. I don't know about anybody
41's
else.
probably, is that necessary?
It's not the stormwater stuff, is it?
Cold tar-based sealants.
Okay.
That was Eric's condition.
Who's Eric?
Yep. But does it apply to this?
Well, it was a generic thing that we put in.
Oh, all right. then.
Yeah. It's one
So
of
if
the-
they ever do
Is it- All right.
put any,
So I move that we approve the OOC
As amended.
for 95-937 as amended
Second.
and issue it.
seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstained?
Yeah, I mean,
You just abstention happy today, aren't
Same thing.
God, you abstain on everything, you sit out in the hall half the meeting, why do you even come?
Okay, I can leave right now.
you? You just said that on TV, too.
Vice Chair chastised at that point of controversy.
By the chair.
Just a couple
He's
of,
gonna recuse himself for,
so just a few quick things.
so we're done with this?
Yeah. Are you guys okay if I jump to agents' announcements?
What?
Yeah.
You okay if I jump to agents' announcements?
Fine.
Okay.
I thought you said 80s announcement.
So, do you remember Jonathan Kazarian, 123 Green Street? He had a violation back when I first started with the commission. Greg, you might not.
No,
I
I
don't think
don't
you were on the
remember that.
commission. He had done some work in his backyard. He had cleared out a couple of things. He's trying to cut back poison ivy, trying to cut back
yeah, I
overgrown
remember that.
shrubs. Lives next door to Gene.
Yeah.
And I sent out a letter to applicants in June saying that your 2020 permits are going to be expiring. His permit officially expired on January 9th. He reached out to me the beginning of this month asking for an extension. I admit that the letters that I sent out to applicants did not say that there was a 30-day requirement, so he wouldn't have known unless he had somehow looked or reached out to me. But he wasn't able to get to the work because they've had 2 babies and they've been busy with life. But that was his reasoning for wanting to ask for an extension. And because it was a violation, I don't see it as an issue. But it also went beyond the 30-day requirement window. So I wanted to see what the commission thought.
What kind of extension was he looking for?
I didn't ask him for time frame, but I can imagine probably 3 years. I don't think he would need 3 years to do the work, but
It's just invasive species, just
nuisance.
nuisance species.
That's all he was doing?
Yep,
That's it? Oh,
just nuisance
not a big
species
deal.
removal, and then was gonna plant in some native species that we had recommended per the order.
I'm fine with doing that.
If he has the intention to do it, I think we should probably grant him.
Don't look at me,
Yeah,
I got to abstain.
One for the
Yeah,
chair.
the
What do you
pot
need, a
calling the kettle
motion?
black.
We-
I'm
we need a
fine with it,
motion?
too.
Okay.
Yes,
I make a
please.
motion that we do a
Issue
grant,
an ex-
that we issue an extension to OOC 95-902 Jonathan Kazarian, 123 Green Street, for 3 years.
Second.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
No, or abstention? Okay.
Okay.
Do we have the ORAD, or we don't have that done, right? You don't have that
I
ready?
have a signed page and then I'm
Oh,
gonna
okay.
draft it tomorrow.
Okay, and then you're
Um,
gonna send it out to us to review?
Correct.
Okay.
Couple more things, quickly, just to give you an update. The deed restriction for 30 Raymond Way, you recall this?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's been bounced back and forth between the town manager's office, and, town council, and I think at this point, all the stakeholders have reviewed it. I've put it on our agenda for the 27th to accept the deed restriction. And the property owners plan on coming, that way they can sign the document. Jean will have to sign the document as well, and then I can get it notarized, the next day, on
I'm
the
not gonna be here.
28th. I can't, okay, shoot. You're gonna be out on the 27th, how about February?
I could, yeah, I'll be back in February.
Okay.
What does Jean have to sign?
Yeah, can't the vice chair sign?
The way that the
Future chair?
Stop.
The way that the document was written was for the chair. I don't know. Would it be a problem if Bill signed?
No, it wouldn't be a problem.
No, I don't. it
Would
wouldn't
you
be a
be
problem.
here?
No, what if he dies?
I'm not here, so he's acting for that meeting.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works for me. So the property owners will come, they'll sign the document, I'll have it notarized the next day. And then that's on for the 27th. No questions or comments on that? Okay, the next thing is I had to issue an emergency certification for a beaver dam breach. It was impacting, the railroad tracks, and it was impacting Howe Street. The beavers are going to be trapped, I believe, and the dam will be breached. I know what you're gonna say, Hack. So, one of the things that we looked in, Mark and I have been looking into potentially a beaver management program in town. And what that would do is provide funding to abate situations like this, that are impacting public infrastructure or public roadways or like the railroad tracks. It wouldn't be meant for the private homeowner that's having that's having one problem. It would be meant for large scale situations such as when the Spring Street culvert was impacted and it was flooding over the street. The town of Billerica actually has this established. They manage over 50 sites. They contract out with Beaver Solutions for a budget of $15,000. And what that contract includes and what that does is they are able to manage over 43 of those sites without using lethal force toward the beavers. So they use beaver deceivers and water loading control devices, and part of the contract with Beaver Solutions is that they come out and manage and maintain those systems. It's not done by the Department of Public Works. It's not an extra burden on the Department of Public Works.
Done too.
Yep, it
without
was.
problems.
Historically, it was maintained, that contract, that budget was maintained through the Board of Health. When their Board of Health agent retired, it went to the Conservation Commission. I reached out to other conservation agents to see how many other cities and towns might have this in effect or might use this kind of a program. Nobody else but Billerica responded. And there's actually a webinar next week that I'm gonna jump on and see what could happen, because it seems like we're getting these comments and concerns from folks all the time, and it seems like a lot of times it does impact public infrastructure. And
What happens when you build in beaver habitat?
yeah,
How many sites do we have that are problematic?
we only know about 10, to be honest, but I think there's a lot
We have even
more.
that many.
10 in Ashland?
Wasn't the mosquito control handling those trapping?
Sure, some of these aren't muskrats?
Sure, 30.
Well, one of those is the Oregon Club, they have it.
Well, about
Muskrat
30
disease
beavers were
seekers.
trapped when I
Wow.
first came here because of the impacts to the landfill and impacts to Main Street. So I think it's an actually pretty decent solution when you think that Billerica has over 55 sites and they manage 43 of them non-lethally. It
great.
benefits, I think, all parties because there's people who live near the beaver dams or near the huts that want to see the wildlife but don't experience the threat of the flooding because they're not near the dam. So it could potentially be a win-win situation. It'd be something that if I can get town management's approval, if I can get the Mark Orem on board, it'd be something that'd be in one of our budgets. Whose, I don't know.
Where's the funding come from?
We would have to put it in our budgets, and it would probably be through the general fund, to be honest.
But if they're doing 50 at 15, we should be able to do it at a fairly nominal.
Will they trap the beaver? That's what you do?
No. Most
they
of those
manage
sites
the
are managed without trapping them. Most of those sites are managed by putting in a water erosion control device or something called a beaver deceiver that allows the water to still flow.
I thought that's what the mosquito control used to do, that free of cost, isn't it?
Yep, but mosquito control doesn't do that all the time. Mosquito control does that when there's a threat of mosquito population and mosquito-borne kind of illnesses and diseases.
Because of beavers.
Yeah.
We need
So
to
what do
do it
you,
because
what do
of
you want from
beavers.
us?
I want to see if the commission, A, is on board on this. If you are, B, should I do more research and do it? And if you really are, should I approach town management?
I think yes.
I'm tired of the beavers getting blamed for everything in Ashland, but that aside,
I think yes,
I'm
I
on
think
record for
that's-
saying that before. Yeah.
Commission's okay?
Yeah.
All right, I'll look into it further.
You're recusing, Gene?
No,
He doesn't want to talk about the beavers.
You're abstaining.
no, this is my opinion. We are the regulatory authority when it comes to someone wanting to remove a dam or, us and the Board of Health. The party who is affected by beavers are the ones that should be trying to figure out how to deal with them and then come to us and ask us for a permit to, in fact, do that. We shouldn't be the ones going out trying to figure out how the solution to the problem. I understand what you're doing because it's non-lethal. It's, rather than somebody going out and just trapping the beaver and then ripping the dam out. But it's still not our responsibility to figure out how to deal with the beavers. It's it's just like, it's our
No, I think
responsibility
that
to
she's
issue a
just,
permit.
that's true, but she's being proactive, because some people don't bother to call anybody, they just
No,
take
I
it into their own hands.
But we're also protecting the wildlife in the
Yeah.
wetlands, and a beaver is in the wetlands, and we're trying to protect him too.
Well, we
But
protect
if
their
you're
habitat.
talking this affecting infrastructure, then
protect
it
him.
really should be under DPW.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yep,
If
and
all we're talking about is town infrastructure, if it's flooding the railroad, why isn't the MBTA in here?
Well, I think that, working in concert with these other people is not a bad idea. I mean, it shouldn't be solely our responsibility, but
Right.
No, but
That's
she
my
could
point, is,
research
but is it really Megan's responsibility to even do that?
No, but as part of town government, she could research it and then connect with DPW and say, okay, here's how we could get this done and put it in their budget, or like you said, Mark's, with the Board of Health.
yeah.
I don't think it should be in our budget. I don't know why Billerick has got, the Concom is doing it. or why.
yeah, I think it's a Board of Health budget thing.
But it also could be DPW,
Yeah.
either one.
Well, to issue a permit to remove a dam or put in a beaver deceiver, it's a combination between Board of Health and Concom. We need approval from both.
Okay.
So whether the Board of Health does it or we do it, I don't know that it really matters either way. But my point is that we're the reactive agency, not the proactive agency on permitting.
Oh, I know.
True.
But she's
So
a
we-
conservation agent.
That's the thing I have
and-
is, why are we doing all the legwork? Why shouldn't the people that are responsible to
'Cause in the real
manage
world,
the
it doesn't
town,
always
manage the
happen.
roads, why aren't they the ones doing the legwork?
Because it's in the reality, they don't always do it. She's the one that thought of it.
Well, when they come to us for
Marquez, not me.
when they
Huh?
come to us for a
Marquez, not me.
permit to take out a dam, then we say, why don't you go talk to Bill Rick and find out how they do it? And we would be really very happy to approve the way they do it. But do that first.
I did.
To who?
Bill Ricka.
No.
DPW or.
When Doug Small
Mark.
comes in and says, I got a beaver dam that I want to take out, you say, go talk to Bill Ricka.
Oh,
Figure out how
gotcha.
they do it. That's what I mean. That's what I think we should
Well,
be doing.
who is the emergency cert for?
The emergency certification was for DPW.
Okay.
So we have to ratify that.
Yes.
And what you would want to do at this point is to go to them and say, hey, you want to be looking into what Billerica does in the future. So
Right.
that you don't have to do this.
Right.
She can give them her research right now.
That's fine.
On this.
That's fine. I don't think you should be spending your time on it. I think there are other things that you could be spending your time on that are related to the Conservation Commission,
I hear you.
okay?
Absolutely.
That's my opinion.
So, do we need to ratify the one that you already done?
Yes,
The
please.
emergency
Is there a vote
yeah.
required?
I make a motion that we ratify the emergency certification for House Street Beaver.
I second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, abstain?
Okay, signed documents are coming
Well,
around.
Hey, I have a question. 244 Prospect Street, what happened with that?
244 Prospect Street. Did everybody go out to this site?
I don't think anyone did.
Although, Bill,
I
you don't
did.
know anything
Greg
about
was
it.
talking about it.
Yeah, I failed, yeah.
Yeah, I did.
I know, it's across the street from
I saw
my-
you guys email about it. That's what I saw.
Oregon Road.
Well, both Meg and I are of
Which
the
is this?
opinion that it's
Oregon Road.
not jurisdictional.
Yeah, I would concur with you on
Was there
that.
any water that flowed under
Just be a
Prospect Street,
swale.
worked their way
We
to
signed this
Scarborough?
already?
It's hard to tell, it
Yeah,
goes into a
that's
storm
fine.
drain.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
Figured
okay.
black
We
one.
did.
Should take
I
a
just
picture.
But it
had
just looks like runoff,
Oh,
it looks like a
behave.
swale and a runoff.
Thanks. This is difficult as it is.
So 244, we
to
can
sign.
say non-jurisdictional.
Well, I thought it was.
I think it is non-jurisdictional.
244?
244 Prospect Street, it was something.
Oh,
we
the
should-
thing you called me about?
I may have called you.
Or we
So you
talked,
have
who
one.
did I talk to about it?
Me, I brought it up at the
Is this
last
your
meeting.
pen?
Is that green or
Green.
blue?
That's black.
Okay, good. You're good.
Don't let
Oh,
the
do you need
outside
a-
color
yeah.
fool you.
Fool you.
Okay, we haven't, just this 126 thing left?
Just the 126 and any member prerogatives. I'm done with my stuff.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. DOT, that's it?
DOT is it.
Okay, good.
Dean, you have to recuse from this?
Oh, do I have to?
Yeah.
Oh, do I have to go home?
I'm going home.
Good night.
Good night, folks.
Right.
See ya in February.
Yeah.
Good night,
night.
Judy. Thank you.
So what's this issue?
Okay, so the informal discussion with Mass DOT, they were supposed to submit revised plans for the wetland replication area by, up by Cedar Street behind the fire station. I have yet to get a copy of those revised plans. I had put them on the agenda for the 13th, intending to do that, but they did not get me the information.
Oh, okay.
However, they did bring up an issue with the order of conditions, a couple of issues with the order of
Yeah, I saw
conditions.